Good morning. I'd like to call the June 12th meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission to order. Thanks to commissioners, members of the public, and invited presenters for joining us today. Jen, will you remind folks how to use Teams?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, we'll be using Teams. As panelists, you have the option to unmute yourself and turn on your camera and turn off. You also have the option to raise your hand and react. Please remember that this meeting is public and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel at a later time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Relative to our agenda, we have three primary topics today. We will be talking about three of the main deliverables that we have over the course of the next several months. Our natural and working lands net carbon sequestration and storage goal, as well as the TIGR Project 2.0, which is our forecast project. And then our report to the legislature, which is due December 1st. Well, we anticipate public comments around noon. They might occur a little earlier because we've left quite a bit of time for our first two topics in particular. So if folks are interested and you haven't signed up, do let us know that you would like to provide public comments. And Jen, can you just remind folks of what's easiest for you in terms of that people letting you know that they want to provide comments?
Yeah, we have a Microsoft form that I'll share in the chat, but during the meeting, during public comment, if you just raise your hand, I will unmute you and you'll be able to provide your verbal public comment.
Thank you, Jen. So a really important meeting today with a lot of discussion of these three major deliverables that we have between now and December 1st. Before I open the floor to others, I wanted to give just a few updates. Last month, the governor's Natural Resources Office hosted a meeting for agency directors and board and commission chairs. And the meeting was focused primarily on Executive Order 25-26, the Resilience Executive Order. Although we did touch on the other executive orders related to climate very briefly. During the meeting, the board and commission chairs were convened as a group to discuss how we could work together better to support shared success for natural resources in the state of Oregon. And we were also asked specifically to give feedback on one of the executive orders provisions, the 25-26, which proposed to create a subgroup of board and commission members to work together on behalf of all the commissions and boards on implementation of the executive order as part of the kind of accountability section of the executive order. And we had a great conversation. There was a lot of enthusiasm for this idea, so much enthusiasm that we said rather than a subgroup, we would all like to meet regularly to discuss issues and opportunities to advance the executive order. We also made some recommendations on ways we could keep each other more informed about the work of boards and commissions and the natural resource agencies, and the Natural Resource Office seemed very positive about that. I also just wanted to highlight, I imagine that commissioners likely saw the governor's announcement about the establishment of a work group to develop a new transportation vision for the state. And the work group will be meeting 9 times between now and the end of the year to develop recommendations to the governor and legislature. As we have discussed quite a bit this year, the transportation sector makes up the largest percent of Oregon's sector-based emissions. And the commission has talked about ideas around the progress on implementing the STS, the State Transportation Strategy, as well as from experts outside of the agency about their ideas. So we discussed transportation in December, April, and May. So it's good to see that the governor is creating this work group, and I think we'll all be interested in tracking that closely. My third update is on behalf of Director Bateman, who is not able to be with us today, but she wanted me to just mention that DLCD will be hosting the last meeting of the Floating Offshore Wind Roadmap Roundtable on Tuesday, June 23rd, and it's going to be 9 to 4 at the Coquel Casino Resort, and there will also be options for virtual attendance to the meeting if you can't get to Coos Bay. And they'll be discussing the final changes to the roadmap and how it should be rolled out and implemented. So with that, I'll open it up to others to provide updates. Oh, Commissioner V or W. Sounds like a V. Commissioner Washutinsky. Sorry, I'm still having trouble with that. Looks like he needs a
He should
permission.
be able to unmute himself now.
Can you try muting yourself?
Yes, I'm here now.
There
Thank
we
you.
go. Great.
Yeah, I tried to put the phonetic spelling in today, so in case
That's helpful. I like that.
yeah, in case anybody needs the assist. Well, good morning, commissioners and everyone else. Just wanted to highlight that we're in the third month of the largest energy crisis ever experienced by the global economy, and that even if the conflict in the Middle East were resolved today, which the president assures us for the 39th time is about to happen, that we would be, that's an actual number, by the way, I heard on the news this morning, that we would be months, if not more, from a more normal energy flows globally. That's because it takes a time for oil to transit the Strait of Hormuz and reach its final destination, and because stockpiles of fuel have been drawn so low in order to try to buffer the global economy, that there's going to be elevated demand to rebuild those stockpiles for months and months to come. So and if it's not resolved, then that same issue of lowered stockpiles becomes critical, as because stockpiles can't refineries and pipelines and storage facilities cannot dip below a certain level before they reach criticality. So we have some major headwinds in front of us. I'm excited to report that we are really trying to do our best to use our limited tools to address some of these needs. So working with the folks at the Portland Clean Energy Fund and our LIHEAP program that is administered by Multnomah County, and trying to figure out how can we identify households that use oil heat, which is about $6 a gallon right now. And typically, it's supposed to be cheaper during the summer, but it unfortunately hasn't been. And trying to direct those families to the new program that's just launched from the city of Portland called Energy Friendly Homes, which can, for somebody at that income level that you qualify for LIHEAP, will give a household $50,000. That, of course, leaves the rest of the state in households that are relying on oil heat, still in the same lurch, but trying to figure out what tools we have. Another tool that's available, just to overall lower energy costs, are the tools that have been worked on and passed by the Public Utility Commission for utility rates. There's low income rates. We're trying to make sure the word gets out about those. I put a link into the chat there. So anybody in IOU territory who is income qualified can take advantage of those rates. I'll note too that we're heading into a weather emergency this weekend. Some very high and dangerous heat, especially because it falls early in the season. That it highlights the criticality of energy systems to public health, but I think it also there's new rules now that cease disconnections during extreme weather events and provide people who are income qualified some options to try and get their power reconnected if they have been disconnected, so that they can stay safe in their homes. And then finally, one last option for folks that are working on commercial buildings. We know that, even it's been a tough time in the commercial building sector. We have had a long-running program to make it easier to finance investments in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other building upgrades called Property Fit. We're working with jurisdictions all over the state now to expand that program, make it available in other parts of the state. It was authorized by the legislature. Multnomah County was the first program that was established in the state. So we did the heavy lifting to try to figure it out. And now it's people are following in our tracks, which is really gratifying. And we'll actually be doing a workshop with the Energy Trust of Oregon, where I put that link into the chat there. So people, if you're interested in energy financing and how lower cost borrowing can play a role in helping commercial building owners adapt to an era of higher utility costs while making critical investments in the buildings, check it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And Jen, would you mind taking the slides down while we're doing the updates? Great. That way we can see more people. Other updates? Commissioner McNichol?
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to raise a question of something that the commission might want to consider in the future, and maybe a request for an update. And this is regarding the climate protection plan. There's, as I think everybody knows, there's litigation related to that. And then secondarily, there's a considerable discussion about cap and invest as an alternative. And the timing of, well, I have lots of opinions about where that's coming from, but the timing of it is precarious, potentially, because some are seeking to terminate the climate protection plan now and then replace it in the future. There's also a lot of uncertainty about how the funds from a cap and invest program would be spent. Everyone in the state capital are looking for money for all kinds of things. So I guess my request would first be maybe get an update from DEQ at some point on the implementation of the climate protection plan. Where are they at this time? And then I know we've talked about in our planning process the importance of strong recommendations to the legislature that's coming up, and I think we might want to consider this issue as something we talk about, because I think it's certainly critical to our meeting our objectives and etc. So that's my comment. I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Carter. I think that's as we heard from DEQ briefly at the last meeting, they can't really speak about the litigation specifically, but they did Colin shared with us that they're kind of going full steam ahead, but it would be nice to kind of know what's behind that full steam ahead. And then I think to your point, kind of having an opinion or at least considerations for how the state might best go forward would be probably pretty important given the nature of the conversation. So we'll put that on our to-do list and give it a little more thought. Representative Gamba. Oh, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
I think Gregory Dotson was ahead of me.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see that. Commissioner Dotson.
I'm happy to wait if you'd like to go, Representative Gamba.
All right.
Okay.
I just wanted to give a little feedback on Mr. McNichol's comment. We've been doing our best to make it clear to the Republicans, the very small handful of Republicans that are interested in a cap and invest program to replace the CPP, that we would not be dismantling the CPP until money was coming in from said cap and invest program. So that's 5 to 6 years. And that cap and invest program would have to be such that it would be able to tie into California, Washington, and Ontario. We've been trying to help them understand all the parameters by which we would even be entertaining a concept of standing up cap and invest, because we are pretty convinced that their whole goal is just to get rid of the CPP, and then they'll either refer cap and invest to the voters, or they'll vote against it in the end, or whatever. It's a game. So nobody in the caucus is taking this particularly seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, maybe I'll circle back to you, Rep. Gamba, and to any others that might have opinions about what's the best role for the commission relative to that discussion. Because, on the one hand, we want to be thoughtful about it, but on the other hand, we don't want to give. Well, I'll hold the rest of my thoughts. We'll be thoughtful about it. We need to be thoughtful about how we engage.
That's a good idea.
Commissioner Dotson.
Great, thank you so much. Nice to see everyone this morning. I just wanted to mention from the Data Center Advisory Committee that we had a session on energy, which is, I would commend for anybody to take a look at the presentations are online, PowerPoints are online, and as well as a video transcript of the entire meeting. And I think it's pretty interesting and relevant. Climate came up to a significant extent. And that we had that at the end of May. Our next meeting, and again, that's at you can see that at the Data Center Advisory Committee website, which has a complicated URL, but you could just search it and it comes up pretty easily. And then on June 26th, we'll be having another one. This one will focus on two things: affordability, what's the energy costs essentially, rate impacts of data center development, and then also sort of what's the state incentive issues associated with it. So that might be something that people are interested in. And then I just take 1 second to share. I'll put this in the chat. This is just almost an aside, but I think it's interesting historical context. This is a documentary. It's only 23 minutes long, from 1973 about the oil crisis, and it focuses on Oregon. So you can see how people in Bend were reacting at the time. And this, we often forget that, the oil crisis in 71 to 73, really, that's what created the states to begin, departments of energy. That's what began the International Sharing Program of oil, and created the International Energy Agency, which their mission has, of course, logically sort of changed to also factor in climate decisions over time. And so just a little trip down memory road for anybody who's interested. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dotson. Representative Gamba.
Yeah, so now for an actual announcement or update. A couple weeks ago, we had the National Governors Association hosted a convening out in Pendleton on the Oregon energy policy. And it was predominantly, or it felt at least to me like it was predominantly about transmission. and the work that we need to be doing and how much and in what ways the state needs to engage in that so that we can do a better job of standing up our clean energy production development. And I think it went really well. And I think it feels like the state is aligning around something like a transmission authority, if not a transmission authority. So I just wanted to give that update.
Representative Gamba. And I think I saw a note from Sarah Reif from ODFW that you might have an update you want to get. Is that right?
Thank you, Chair McDonald. This is Sarah Reif. I just put it in the chat that the related to the Executive Order 2526, the climate resilience for lands and waters. One of the action items was the development of a defining the attributes. What do we mean when we talk about resilient lands and waters? And that was a collaborative effort between OEB and ODFW that involved a lot of creative thought during a design workshop, and we're very happy to report that that final report is available, and I put it in the chat.
Thank you. I saw that this morning. That was great to see that out and posted. So congratulations. Commissioner Apter.
Thank you. I thought Rep. Gamba, you might have mentioned next week is legislative committee days, and all of the committees have quite stacked agendas, including House Climate. So for those interested in tuning in, there will be presentations from various agencies and other stakeholders on the WESTEC 10-year report, on the Power Act, the Data Center Advisory Committee, updates on microgrids and interconnecting, the renewables to the grid. I'm missing some. Updates on HB 3409, the big climate resilience package from 2025, a hearing on medium heavy duty electrification. I'm sure I'm missing some topics because climate protection program. That's what originally prompted me to share this update, since the top of the conversation was about status of implementation. So DQ will be presenting there as well. I'm happy to drop in links to the respective committees if folks don't know where to find those on a list.
Yeah, that sounds great, Commissioner Apter, I think. And that is something that folks can tune into virtually and watch during or after the meeting is over. I'll add that we will be presenting on the workforce study that we did, the Natural Climate Solutions workforce study on Tuesday as well. So it's great to have an interest in that study. Not seeing other hands for updates. Okay, well, with that, I think we can move to our first agenda item, and that is our Natural Climate Solutions goal setting agenda item. And as we discussed at earlier meetings, the Commission and the Oregon Department of Energy were jointly directed to consult with 4 other agencies: the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, ODFW, and the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and to develop a recommended net sequestration and storage goal. And staff at ODO have been working with a committee of the Commission to get input on it, as well as an interagency working group and experts to develop this draft, which was posted of potential recommendations for consideration by the Commission. And the purpose of today's discussion is to make sure that we are really clear on the recommendations staff have offered and the science and considerations that went into them. Oregon Department of Energy has initiated a public comment period, which will run through July 2nd. We will review the public comments, and we expect to vote on the recommendations at our July meeting. With that, I'll turn things over to Liz and Jason to present, and then we'll open things up to cover clarifying questions. So if you have clarifying questions, just if you could hold them to the end, that would be appreciated. And we'll hear from the commissioners that were on the committee, and then to open it to all members of the commission, including the agency directors that we were asked to consult with if they'd like to make any comments. So with that, take it away, Liz and Jason.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. It's good to see you today. We are pleased to be discussing the draft report with you. Jason and I will be running through the sections of the report that you see on the slide briefly. And we wanted to share our gratitude for the Commission Committee and the National Working Lands Advisory Committee and the agencies that provided guidance on this report. It is a much better report from all the guidance that we received. And hope that you can see your recommendations, concerns, and ideas reflected in the report, even if we are not able to address them directly at this moment in time. Next slide. So to set the stage for some time, and rightfully so, sector-based emission reductions have been the focus of climate action efforts. However, climate experts have warned that even if we successfully reduce our emissions, which you will hear more about from my colleagues today, there are legacy emissions in the atmosphere that must also be removed to meet the global goal of not exceeding an increase of 2 degrees Celsius. Oregon's lands are a powerful carbon removal strategy. Nationally, U.S. lands sequester carbon at a net rate equivalent to 14% of the nation's sector-based greenhouse gas emissions. And that equivalency rises to about 80% in Oregon and demonstrates the potential natural climate solutions possess in contributing to the greenhouse gas challenges we face. Oregon's natural and working lands can contribute greatly to helping this global crisis while providing tangible benefits to communities, economies, and the environment right now and into the future. We offer these statistics to help communicate the importance of Oregon lands in climate action. However, it's always important to remember that lands do not reduce sector-based emissions. And we set our discussion up as we set our discussion up for today, we want to remind the commissioners that the word net is used for the land sector because land sequester carbon, but can also generate land-based emissions. And so you'll hear us use the word net many times today while we're going through the goal options. Next slide. You see here some of the benefits I was just alluding to on the previous slide. States, tribes, state and federal agencies, local governments, and the private sector all have a hand in guiding Oregon land and water management. And the statute directs us to leverage existing programs for this work. These programs will be detailed in the forthcoming Natural Climate Solutions and Metrics Analysis, but we wanted to take some time in the report to illustrate some of the policies, programs, and plans that can help achieve the goal the Commission is considering. The report will also describes, not will, but does, the report also describes the important role the state's land use system has in smart growth and balancing conservation and development needs. It's these overarching policies that have maintained working lands and natural lands from the sprawl challenge common in other states. Lastly, the report offers this goal as complementary to Executive Order 2526, which focuses on the resilience of Oregon's lands, waters, and communities. Next slide. Jason is going to walk us through the goal options presented in the report. We maintained the 2021 proposal for your consideration and recommend 2 additional options for consideration in the report. The first modifies the 2021 proposal slightly to account for issues that Jason will describe. And second, offers a new goal based on new information we have available to us now, and also meets the statutory direction for the Commission and ODO to consider new information as it becomes available. With that, Jason.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, Commissioners. As Liz introed, I'm going to walk you through the different options that we provided in our staff report. So option 1 on the screen here is the same as the 2021 proposal. The goals are annual sequestration rates of 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 and 9.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2050 relative to an activity-based baseline. This 2021 proposal also emphasized that the goal should be additional to the sector-based emission reduction goals. Next slide, please. So if the commission wants to or chooses to keep the rates from the original 2021 proposal, ODO recommends changes to align the time horizons with other state goals and allow for additional time to meet the goal. We also recommend setting a target net sequestration rate rather than an additional amount per year as written in option 1. This latter change is to be responsive to the declining trend of land-based removals we see in the land-based net carbon inventory. In the figure on the slide, you can see the declining trend and that red dotted line and how these targets were set using the 2021 additional net sequestration rates. So with these adjustments, the current goals would be modified to read, achieve net sequestration of at least 53 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year across all land categories by 2035. This net sequestration rate was determined by adding 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent to the current goal rate for 2030 to the the current goal rate for 2030 to the 5-year average rate of net land-based sequestration using the recent inventory, which is 48. The second part of that goal is to achieve net sequestration of at least 57.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year across all land categories by 2050. Similar to that 2035 rate, it was determined by adding 9.5 to the 5-year average from the inventory. So you can see from the graph that these targets are well within the rates at which Oregon's landscape has sequestered carbon in the past 2.5 decades, so since 2020. Next slide, please. And so alternatively, if the commission wants the goal to be more ambitious, it could update the current goal based on the new data available to Oregon, which were not considered previously to produce annual net sequestration rates. Similar to the changes recommended in option 2 and option 3, ODO set the goal as a total annual rate in the goal year based on the 5-year average in order to avoid a scenario of meeting yearly net sequestration goal while also still experiencing a declining trend overall. The new goals would read to achieve net sequestration of at least 57.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year across all land categories by 2035 and achieve net sequestration of at least 62.4 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year across all land categories by 2050. Sorry, it's tough to get over that combination of words sometimes. So option 3 is informed by key data sources used to calculate a range of potential net sequestration rates. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the U.S. National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, and other federal level analysis, and Oregon's new data from the land-based net carbon inventory, as well as mitigation potentials from mitigation potentials and net annual sequestration rates of natural climate solutions per the scientific literature. ODO selected annual net sequestration rates of 9.6 and 14.4 in addition to the 5-year average in order to create targets that are responsive to the trends in Oregon's land-based removals. These values of 9.6 and 14.4 come from our analysis of 3 approaches to goal setting, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. And again, you can see here that the targets are well within the range of annual removals that Oregon's lands have achieved previously. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the proposed net sequestration rates using vertical lines overlaying the range of potential net sequestration rates we developed from the 3 approaches. We have shown a version of this graph to the Commission at a previous meeting. So recall that to establish the range of removals shown in the orange bars, we used a global and national greenhouse gas inventory data, Oregon's new land-based greenhouse inventory data, and data that has been published based on mitigation potential for a suite of Oregon-specific activities. The names of those approaches are on the left side of the figure and match what is in the staff report. The rates proposed in options 1 and 2 are indicated by the black vertical lines. These were based on the best research available at the time. And the rates proposed for option 3, indicated by the red vertical lines, are based on the most detailed landscape scaled information we have at this moment, including Oregon's new inventory that was not available at the time of the first goal recommendations. Option 3's 2035 rate, 9.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, is nearly the midpoint between the lower and higher parts of the range and is nearly equal to the 2050 goal from the 2021 proposal. Option 3's 2050 rate, 14.4, is based on the upper range of potential from the new information that we have. Well, while the 2026 proposed rates are larger than the 2021 rates, they are science-based and ambitious, yet achievable, and I emphasize achievable. The 2026 proposed rates are within the range of historic removals we have seen over the last couple of decades, as I mentioned on the previous slides. Another consideration that factored into the 2026 proposed rates are that natural climate solutions, which, as a reminder, are actions that put carbon into the land or protect existing carbon stocks, require time to achieve their maximum or desired rates of sequestration. Some natural climate solutions achieve their peak rates of sequestration in the first decade or two, while others require several decades to mature and for ecosystems to recover their carbon cycling abilities. Odo also considered a lower goal at the beginning lower goal from now until 2035 and a higher goal between 2035 and 2050. But we recognize that according to the data and scientific reports we have reviewed, that we need to act quickly and at a large scale to make achieving the 2050 goal more likely. Additionally, more carbon sequestered or protected now means less need for carbon sequestration and protection in the future, while also reducing climate impacts on human communities and ecosystems in the meantime. Next slide, please. So to recap, here are all the, yes.
Sorry, I think we have a fair amount of time for this agenda item, and this is a lot to take in.
Sure,
so just maybe just slightly slower so
people
can
no
absorb this. Thank you.
Right.
You are so attuned to it that
Yeah. Sorry, I've been looking at this in the report for too long.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
We can certainly hold on this slide for people to digest as well, since this has all three of the options in front of you. So to recap, here are all the options displayed together. All three are science-based options, and our view is that any one of them would be acceptable. So we recommend options 2 and 3 in order to ensure that we are not meeting an annual net sequestration rate goal while experiencing overall decline in land-based removals each year. Importantly, please keep in mind that actions we take may not be reflected in the inventory rapidly, and for that reason, the statute has also directed us to establish an activity-based metrics tracking system to understand our on-the-ground progress, separate from what the inventory may reflect. We are working on establishing that accounting system right now with the agencies that are listed in statute. And while there are practical constraints on implementation, like the time it takes to build partnerships, permit projects, align agency infrastructure, build a workforce, and secure investments, option 3 focuses on the science that provides information about what is needed to contribute to solving the climate crisis, rather than these policy and implementation challenges at hand. It also meets the obligation required in the statute that the Commission and Odo consider new information as it becomes available. So we can hold here for a moment. Otherwise, I will pass it back to Liz.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
We'll flash this slide again at the end of this presentation while discussion takes place, if it's might be helpful to look at while everyone's talking.
Commissioner Steckler, do you really want to break in with a question now, or can you hold it until the end of the presentation?
I do. Thank you so much, Chair. Just a quick question, and just apologies. I'm relatively new to the commission, and so this particular topic might have been covered. But I guess the kind of the overarching question that I have as we're thinking about the goal and these goals options is, what is the outcome that these goals are going to achieve? So, are one of these going to do a better job of getting us to net zero by 2050, or Oregon is, taking responsibility for our contributions or our capacity for absorbing carbon. So I guess I want to get it I definitely want to understand, as we're thinking about those different numbers or the different options, which one kind of gets us to that outcome that we're really trying to achieve. And have we defined that outcome? And there's hints to that in the goal setting. And so I just want to make sure I'm really clear in my head, like, what are we trying to get to, and how do these goals get us there?
I think that's a great discussion question. So I just propose that maybe you hold that, because as Liz just mentioned, this slide will be up later in the slideshow or in the presentation, excuse me, when we're having our discussion. So if it's okay to hold it, then and you'll hear some of the background in the next few slides about how these were arrived at.
Great.
Back
Thank
to you,
you, Chair,
Liz.
and thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. So in the report, several topics are discussed. And Jason mentioned the first three on these slides. The goals are trying to address the declining trend of removals that we're seeing on the landscape, that net sequestration over time occurs differently and across different ecosystems and different natural climate solutions. And that time horizons are important to consider, and we recommend aligning them with the other state goals that we have. I'll quickly talk about the next three. Next slide. So moving from talking about the data, the next three considerations are no less important, and they are the context in which we're hoping to achieve the goal, some of the context. We heard the commissioners in the committee request to include land ownership information and to inform the recommended goal, and we have talked about that in the report. We have greenhouse gas emissions and removals information by land type, and we have land ownership by land type, but at this time we do not have carbon dynamic information by land ownership. So that is a limitation that we're working within right now. It's something we're working to improve in the next inventory update. However, studying land ownership by the inventory land categories provides valuable information. We know that Oregon is just over half federal lands, and working with federal partners is critical. And all lands will contribute to meeting our goal. And there is also fabulous opportunity for investment with our tribal partners, private and local partnerships. And we can also work to incentivize NCS actions on these lands. I think that we hear from our partners that incentives are an underused strategy in Oregon, and we can pay more attention to that. And certainly modeling will help provide more detail on needs depending on the land type and land ownership, which I will talk more about in the next slides. Next, already there, fabulous. So we also took into consideration, of course, climate change. Climate is changing, and projections suggest that vegetation and soils will be affected negatively. And it's critical to do as much as we can right now to provide the longest establishment time possible for natural climate solutions and to realize the ecosystem services that which they themselves can help in reducing climate impacts. But we also have to acknowledge that climate change may reduce the efficacy of natural climate solutions. And so we created the option 3 goal that relies on intense action over the next 10 years in order to gain the most from the strategies employed. Next slide. So some NCS actions focus on protecting stocks like wetland protection or old growth forest protection, while others focus on increasing rates of sequestration. Currently, another limitation that we have is that we have less complete information about Oregon's carbon stocks. So we crafted a recommendation that focuses on net sequestration. But it should be noted that the statute does ask specifically about net sequestration and storage. And in the report and for one of the policy options I'll describe for the commission to consider, we have identified this as a potential policy and to be able to help create a specific goal for carbon stocks in the future. Okay, next slide. So the policy options in the report to consider, there's a lot of words on the slide, but this is taken directly from the report, is to develop a cross-agency reporting infrastructure. And that has come up across the board as something that is going to help us track progress towards the goal. And our next bit of work is to create activity baselines for the natural climate solutions in the state, so that we'll be able to track that progress, which will be talked about in the natural climate solutions and metrics analysis that is forthcoming. After we have that information to work on modeling which suite of activities might help us meet this goal, would be really helpful. We have set this goal using the land-based net carbon inventory as our reference or our baseline, but to have activity baselines and also then modeling their potentials to be able to see how we may achieve the goal will be extremely helpful to making tangible targets for the state. And then it came up in the commission committee that, and with our partners, to conduct a study on the incentives available to support uptake and transitioning to natural climate solution actions. And lastly, I had mentioned that it would be good to take on a stocks assessment study in order to inform a stocks goal in the future. Next slide. It's important to address this specifically while we're talking about this goal setting today, that the statute requires ODO, the commission, and the agencies to identify metrics and track progress toward a statewide goal, but doesn't consider the current or future capacity of the implementing agencies, nor the data infrastructure needs required for the metrics for the natural climate solution actions within each agency. Metrics may or may not currently be tracked by the agency, and standing that up will take some time in order to help demonstrate our progress towards this goal. And all of them rely on the capacity of our partners and of the agencies. And so some needs for the natural climate solutions effort are beyond this, the ODO's NCS program directly. And we just mentioned the need for the statewide reporting structure, which would make it much easier for everyone to track and have a statewide numbers. Following that thread through to an operation to guide operations, the NCS agencies in the state need increased capacity to set internal reporting and monitoring structures in place, create data infrastructure needed for program or agency-wide reporting, and steward that data over time. It's a big time commitment and investment, and a big reason why much of this information is not available to date as we've been doing our work together. ODO can continue and will continue to advocate for other agencies and raise these points, but the lack of data infrastructure, data professionals, setting up a monitoring and stewarding system is a giant challenge. And in future years, if we have trouble reporting progress on this goal, it will likely be because of these perennial challenges that natural resource agencies face. So with that, next slide. I wanted to just pop up the options again. We'd like to be really clear that at this time, aside from the mitigation potential estimates shared in Appendix D of the report that you can take a look at, we do not know exactly how we would achieve these proposals. We must undertake modeling. We must also establish activity baselines that I talked about and do some spatial analysis on land use constraints, as well as variables like land ownership and government program implementation. So we plan on embarking on that work as funding is available. And it's also important to remember that this goal is voluntary, not regulatory. It's meant to spur collaboration, innovation, and new partnership across private and public lands. And these goals are to provide a guidepost for collaborative action and voluntary action, and a new way to look at the work the natural resources agencies and land stewards are doing in the state. And I see hands, and I'm also finished. So, Chair, would you like to facilitate the discussion?
I would be happy to do that. So we'll open things up. I saw, we'll come back, Commissioner Steckler, in just a minute, but Commissioner Lewis, excuse me, Lem, you had your hand up, I think. Well, actually, sorry, Representative Gamba, I did not see your hand go up, so.
Yeah, he's first.
Yeah, let's start with Representative Gamba.
Okay, thanks. A handful of things. I'm always frustrated by voluntary programs, particularly when it comes to climate, because they're unlikely to be particularly successful. And I would want us to start thinking about ways that we can start to codify some of this more causal, in a more causal way. I know one of the suggestions or the needs is opportunities to help fund things and that the agencies need more capacity to do this work. We have the most broken revenue system of any state in the country. And until we fix that revenue system, and I'm right now recommending that this group include that as part of our recommendations to the legislature, we won't be doing any of that. We are underfunding education, mental health care, every other thing that we're supposed to be funding. And we need to fix that aspect. Otherwise, we're going to continue to fail on all of those, as well as this. And the last piece, I would be interested in sort of brainstorming with this group. It was pointed out that more than 50% of the land that should be sequestering carbon in this state is owned by the federal government. And with the current attitude at the federal government, where on top of drill baby drill, they're going to be in the cut baby cut mode for the foreseeable future, how we can, as a state, figure out ways to slow them down or stop them from cutting all of the BLM and Forest Service lands that exist in this state, because we will go from being 14th in the country to very bad after that. More on par with how much renewable energy we're building. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Gamba. Commissioner Lim.
Can you hear me okay, folks?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And thank you. I'm glad to have a chance to go after Representative Gamba, because I think picking up on some of the things he mentioned, I'm catching up on this topic, so I'm trying to digest from what was presented in the slides. It looked like options for statewide goals at a high level. I'm having some difficulty sort of understanding how to link that to other things. For example, as you note and Representative Gamba notes, one agency or one entity is not the owner of all the land. So I think it could be helpful if you could say, that you're in consultation with, the different agencies, with local governments, with the federal government. It's hard to sort of see what goal is appropriate without looking at feasibility. And then also building on something that Representative Gamba said, I mean, in other things that we do, we sort of talk about a business as usual, and then sort of a goal with respect to some changes from business as usual. So again, it could be helpful. Maybe it's all not possible to do within the limited time or resource constraints, but at some point, maybe thinking about like, what is business as usual, and then what are things that are going on? We sort of do that in other areas of climate policy, policy changes or potential ranges of what's a change from business as usual. So those are sort of my two really questions and suggestions. Because it sort of seems, even if somebody were to set the goal, it's like, how do we get there? That's sort of the natural question. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lamb. That certainly was something that we talked about as part of the Natural Climate Solutions Committee of the Commission. Talked quite a bit about that. And some of the folks on that committee may want to speak to that.
But certainly, I think this is really important work. I'll just want to say that, again, this is a good example of how we're trying to be a leader among states. And so I think it's just a matter of figuring out how we do this. But again, thank you to everybody who's been doing such great work.
Thank you, Commissioner Lim. Alan, did you still want to make a comment?
Yes, more of a process comment for the commission. The legislation says that ODO and OCAC will set this goal, establish the goal, meaning that both must agree to this. And practically speaking, ODO should participate in the conversation and the discussion, but before we vote, express our position. but not vote because we're not part of the voting block of the commission. And if OCAC and ODO agree, then there's no problem. If they don't agree, then we have to have more discussion. Janine's not here today. She's at the National Association of State Energy Officials conference speaking at that today. So, but she will be here in the July meeting. But having said all that, the memo that we sent out to you has ODO's preliminary recommendation as either options 2 or 3. 2 kind of just modernizing the old goal and putting it into context a bit more. So just wanted to put that forward as context for how we should proceed.
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. I'm glad you kind of put an exclamation point on that. I tried to reference that more briefly through the, we were kind of both given this assignment. And so as long as, the commission votes on something that's within the parameters of what ODO is recommending, I think we're good to go. If something were proposed that was pretty different, there need to be more discussion about it. And I would imagine Director Benner would also want to go back to some of the agencies that we were supposed to consult with and just circle back again before we might make a decision that would be outside that. Commissioner Vashu-Tinsky.
Thank you. Just want to express appreciation, first of all, for staff. I was on the subcommittee and just want to appreciate the hard work and diligence that staff brought to the process. And the report is really excellent. So thank you for that. I also think it highlights a couple important points. The research here that was conducted. One is just like the only fusion energy that matters is the big ball of fire in the sky. That we capture via solar panels. The only source of direct air capture for carbon dioxide that matters is our lands, whether it's forests or, working lands. So just want to highlight that, and then also highlight that our climate resilience goals are intimately tied to the goals of this report. So the report highlights, for example, how urban forests are, a potential important source of climate, carbon storage. Our own research here in Multnomah County bears that out. So, but it's also, maybe even more importantly, an important way to build community scale resilience for extreme heat, like we're going to experience this upcoming weekend. So, and we know that forests, as opposed to tree plantations, are more resilient to fire than we know that lands where there's adequate carbon in the soil helps farmers withstand shocks to drought and other natural conditions. So there's lots and lots of co-benefits here to Commissioner Steckler's earlier point that I think are important to highlight. I also think for staff as a recommendation for future work, downscaling the analysis to the county geography would be really helpful. Because I think just speaking as a employee at one of the state's counties, I think it would be really interesting for us to understand, at the local level, what's possible to aid in this effort to try to maximize the storage of carbon dioxide in the landscape. And I suspect there's other colleagues of mine, throughout the state who would also be interested in aiding in that effort. To Representative Gambo's earlier point, well, one is just like resource extraction states are always impoverished to some extent. Look at West Virginia. We're kind of like the West Virginia of the Northwest, right? We're unfortunately, and this is highlighted by the fact that the severance tax was eliminated years ago, right? And devastated rural communities' ability to pay for basic services. So looking back at some of those past policy, what I would call mistakes, might be an important strategy looking forward as well. And then finally, just noting that we have half our lands in federal ownership, that being able to work with our federal delegation, maybe also the federal delegation in Washington, to think about the future and what kind of legislative protections can be initiated to, not only protect ecosystem services on the landscape and all the important things that we care about as Oregonians, but also maximizing the sequestration of carbon dioxide in Northwest lands. So I think there might be some work that we can start doing now in anticipation of some future political arrangement where that might be more advantageous to these kinds of legislative victories. So just kind of throwing that out there as maybe an area of work for either this committee or for the staff to think about that. So thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Steckler, I have not forgotten your question, but I thought we might want to get a few other things on the table and then we can see how to go forward. Commissioner Thorndike.
Yeah, first regarding Representative Gambo's comments regarding the federal, I mean, it's really true. That's kind of like the elephant in the forest. And I'd be kind of curious whether, you know, the goals and everything or should be modeling, and what if that happens? I mean, what's the impact of that? On the private land side, since that would even be more important on the incentives, I was curious whether there's been much analysis on some of there's a project down in Northern California called the Van Eck Forest, which was funded, Pacific Forest Trust, and it was funded through the California's carbon fund. So, I mean, there was quite a bit of work done on that. I can't vouch for anything about, but I just, in terms of looking to our neighbors for who's already apparently done some of this work, and then also that I don't know if we have those kind of goals embedded in any of our, say, OWEB funding or anything like that, where at least being able to direct some incentives towards you know, working lands, easements that end up with more mixed age forests and longer holding periods and things like that on private land. I mean, we have an existing mechanism where those sort of things could be analyzed and addressed. And maybe if there's not even new funding, it might, you know, I don't know if there's barriers there. I'd be interested to know on that. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair, may I pipe in and answer about maybe 3 questions that I've heard, and I think will help further discussion.
I appreciate that. I was just going to go to you.
Oh, great. Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Thorndike. Yeah, we're in a little bit of a different situation in Oregon because both Washington and California have more formal policy and regulation around cap and invest or another kind of regulatory structure that then, for instance, in Washington gets put into a Natural and Working Lands Fund specifically to fund natural climate solutions actions. So there's a very big part of that, the investment that comes in goes into specific buckets of nature-based investment. And California is similar to where their investments go. And so we don't have that kind of infrastructure set up yet. We do have the Natural Working Lands Fund, which is allocated from the legislature on an ad hoc basis from the general fund. So there's that. But to set up something that moves investment or cap, you know, money garnered from the sector-based side into the nature-based side to invest in nature-based solutions would follow suit with California and Washington. I wanted to answer Representative Gamba's question in the chat about kelp marine-based actions. We are including kelp forest restoration and seagrass restoration and protection in our list of natural climate solutions, and will be included in estimating mitigation potentials, et cetera, and also, you know, included in future modeling. For the inventory creation, there was less information relative to how inventory methodologies are put together, and so we're working on filling those science gaps related to those ecosystems. But they are included in what we're considering for actual action in Oregon. And then Commissioner Lem, I just wanted to respond to the business as usual question because it's spot on, and it's where we need to go next. and when I mentioned activities-based modeling, that is where that business as usual comes in, and or that baseline that I was speaking to. In a way, or maybe a non-traditional way, I don't know if it's a non-traditional way, the land-based net carbon inventory trend line does reflect a business as usual, as far as like we were going about doing our thing on the land as we've been doing it, and this is how much has been removed, although not specific, you know, to specific activities, right? Which I think is the question that everyone wants to get to. We have this like big number, but we don't know what the specific activities would be considered, or what they were operating at. So we're going to work on that for sure. I just wanted to let you know that's on our minds.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, I think that those were the 3 questions.
I think Dan, Commissioner Thorndike also asked if OWEB has any consideration of climate, and they do have a climate policy, and it's one of the things that is asked in the newer application process that they have.
It is. I think OWEB is online today. Do they want to chime in?
Sure, yeah, this is Alexa Schmidt. I can speak to that. We have 3 climate evaluation criteria as part of our grant evaluation process, and those include a consideration of how climate change has been incorporated into the design and proposed solution of the project, as well as kind of broader best practices that we look at in our considerations for grant proposals and the activities that they have included.
Great, thank you, Alexa. Commissioner Reitman, who also served on the committee. Thank you for chiming in.
Oh, I just wanted to highlight some voluntary programs that have been very successful. There's 400,000 acres of what we call conservation reserve program that's been converted from highly erodible farmland to perennial grass and trees. There's thousands of miles of riparian protection funded by Bonneville Power and others, and these are included in the new Farm Bill. And just in general, the land in my part of Oregon is all managed partly because of technology, but managed in ways that are sequestering carbon where previously it was gradually losing carbon. So I'm more optimistic, I guess, than some. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, right.
Yes, thank you, Chair McDonald. This is Sarah Wright from the Habitat Division Administrator with ODFW, and on Debbie Colbert, Director Colbert's behalf, just wanted to chime in and also express thanks to staff for the collaboration with the natural resource agencies. I feel like staff really helped us agencies see the role that we play here. Really helped us see how kind of the work that we do can be leveraged in the context of carbon sequestration, and also really listened to us as we talked about our limitations. I particularly, Liz, appreciated your slides on just some of those limitations and hurdles that we would need to get over in order to truly measure. And I also just appreciate the conversation that the commissioners are having right now around what can agencies do, and would highlight very similar conversations as Commissioner Vashutinsky mentioned in his comments, the co-benefits with the conversations that are going on around climate resiliency in the Executive Order 2526. The agencies are meeting with each other and are talking about what we can do, even within existing resources, to Representative Gamba's point, even within existing resources to provide better and more incentives to focus our work in ways that increase resilience of lands and waters. And lucky for all of us, a lot of the actions that you would do to increase resilience also provide a carbon sequestration benefit, if not in the short term, definitely in the long term. So just wanted to I guess, echo and amplify this conversation and let you know that the agencies are actively meeting with each other. There are working groups kind of meeting all over the place in the context of the Executive Order 2526. And so I think maybe just the continued collaboration between this commission and that effort would be a good thing for us to do.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments and the recognition of all the hard work that staff did, not only to include the agencies that were named in the statute that needed to be consulted, but with a much broader list of agencies as well. So really appreciated that. Tom, do you have your hand up again, or do you did you not take your hand down? And you're on mute. Oh, there you go. Thank you. Commissioner Dodson. And then I think we do need to kind of maybe go back to Becky's question, or at least talk about the options again. We aren't making a decision today, but it might help to give some context to the public for their comments to us.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate everyone's comments. And I think I sort of echo some of the thoughts I've heard about, what are we really embracing as far as concrete actions go, and how feasible are they? And I don't think we have terrific answers to those questions. And so I guess I just had two. It doesn't mean you don't need a goal, and then this doesn't mean that the goal shouldn't reflect where we directionally what we need to do. So I thought I'd just ask two quick questions of Liz and Jason, and thank you and all the Odo staff for your work on this. First question is the difference between additional sequestration and net sequestration. I believe is really there is no difference. That you're not going between your first and second option is really just a matter of the way you articulate precisely the same goal. So I just wanted to sort of invite a discussion about whether there is any other difference that you understood between those two. And then the second one is, and I think we've heard a little bit about it through the idea of incentives and cross-agency coordination, but I just would like to hear the best articulation about the benefits of setting a goal and the strength of that goal versus embracing a goal that maybe doesn't have the same kinds of questions about feasibility and workability over time. I hope those questions make sense. Thanks.
Sure. I'll take the first one because it's easier than the second one. No, the first is that actually what you just raised is a good point for us to maybe modify the language in options 2 and 3. So where the 2021 proposal, maybe we should, Jen, could you throw up the language on the screen?
That would be helpful.
Because all three of these options should be considered additional. And so that's probably a word we should add to option 2 and 3. I'm going to pause. I see Jen searching for the discussion option 1, 2, 3 slide. That's it. You see it's highlighted. Okay. Oh, we're starting. We always have to start at the beginning. Okay. So I think the only difference is that in 2021, there, that's great. The commission, when they made their recommendation, kind of assumed net sequestration. They didn't say the word net. So, and recall at the beginning of our presentation, I mentioned that the word net is used in the land-based context. So land sequesters, land also has land-based emissions. So you must always have that word net in front of it, just to be super clear that you're talking about that balance. Wetlands, for instance, can emit methane, but they also sequester. It's like you just want to pay attention to that net. And so it's important that we do too, so that lands can still do the thing they do, and we're getting kind of an accurate balance of where we're at with our sequestration goal. So 2021 proposal should have probably also said net, And then also the next two should probably also say additional, because it is quite our intention that we're looking at, trying to sequester or do work, right? Sequester additionally to what we have been doing. And so we should probably add those words. Does that make sense? Okay, Chair, you agree?
I completely agree that we should be
Okay.
as explicit as we can be in the goal statement, and
Yeah.
having worked on the 2021 proposal, that was certainly on our minds, and we didn't put it in, and I think that importance of having additional needs to be in the other two.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And relative to the second question, and I will offer, and Jason, then I will toss to you to see if you'd like to answer. Relative to maintaining the current amounts versus a new larger amount. I think the question is really if we'd like, if the feasibility of attaining the goal overrides the desire to make a goal that we have to reach for, right? So if it's a stretch goal, or if it's a very attainable, feasible goal. Commissioner Dotson, you had said something in committee that was so salient, and it was just that, like, well, a goal, and one is already set, like, provides the directionality and that ambition and the collaboration, and we really took that to heart. And so I am unsure that we can provide, as staff, more reason for the commission to consider one goal over the other, a larger one versus maintaining. We did the best job we could to let you know that they are, from the science and the data that we have, they are both feasible. They are within the range that our lands have sequestered historically. We could work to get so the biophysical parameters of the landscape are there. And so it is largely up to our, our will, investment, and coordination that will help us achieve or not achieve these goals. So, Jason, would you like to add anything relative to one or the other?
I mean, honestly, I think your summary of that is perfectly good. The more ambitious goal for option 3 is largely based on the recommendations from the IPCC on what is necessary to achieve or limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius. And recent reporting, of course, has indicated that we are likely to go into a period of overshoot and need to increase removals in order to get back to 2 degrees Celsius. And that's not as clean of a process as it sounds like. There's a lot of damage that can be done in the meantime. So there are other reasons beyond the practical considerations for setting a higher goal, but those practical considerations are absolutely understandable and reasonable for the many reasons we've talked about here, between federal ownership of lands and limitations from climate change impacting rates of sequestration from natural climate solutions, et cetera. So anyway.
Thank you. That was excellent, Jason.
Commissioner Steckler, you asked early on kind of what are we trying to achieve, and the commission did recommend updated goals in the roadmap and again in our report to the legislature from 2024. And that included updated sector-based goals and a establishment of a consumption-based goals for the topic we heard about at the last meeting, as well as recommendations for trying to get to net negative as soon as possible. So that's kind of what we're on record as having said before. What these add to that is more specific focus, rather than just kind of a net where we're talking about net to the sector goals that we're really, talking about trying to get to net negative, because that's something that, you know, we all need to be focused on. So that's what we're on record to say. And go ahead and correct me or say it differently, Liz, if you want to.
No, I just wanted to note that Representative Gamba has his hand up. So I just wanted to make sure that you saw that if you hadn't seen that.
I did just see that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Great.
Representative Gamba.
I just wanted to weigh in. It's, you know, it's a purely philosophical question, right? Whether you set the goal at what you know you need to achieve, right? The thing that's necessary, and fail to quite achieve it, or set a goal that you know you can achieve and not achieve as much as you would have had you failed in the higher goal. I have always been a strong proponent for setting the North Star at what is necessary and then doing everything we can to get there, and recognizing that we may not, but not to sort of coddle ourselves into comfort by setting a low goal that we know we can achieve.
Thank you, Representative Gamba. And Commissioner Lynn.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Actually, this is really helpful to hear this discussion. The only thing I'd add to that, just because I think I understood staff saying the higher goal is consistent with IPCC recommendations. So just to clarify and confirm that would be proportionate, sort of saying our Oregon contribution to that. And so then just a question about whether that's the right way to think about it, that we're proportionate, and that's a reasonable logic for a high goal. I agree, it's a reasonable logic. The other thing then I would just say is sometimes when we have 2-year goals, we think about sort of the ramp for in other areas of climate policy. So, you know, how ambitious do you want to be in the near term relative to the long-term goal? And, you know, so that just, if there could be some more said in the written document and the documentation at some point about sort of the thought process of that. Appreciate it.
There's quite a bit of background on your points specifically, and staff did, I think, a really nice job of thinking about what to recommend from a lot of different angles and with different pieces of information. So I think if you dig a little deeper in that report, you'll probably see most of what you were asking about. The ramp is, which I think Liz talked about briefly, which is, you know, we got to take time to do the things we need to do to really implement a lot more than we're implementing today to do that additional. But at the same time, the sooner we do things, the bigger the benefit we get. So there was a lot of thought given, you know, from lots of different angles, which I think the staff did a nice job of. Commissioner Steckler, how do we do on giving you more context?
I think it's been very helpful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I guess I will say I agree with staff that the way the option one is, I've never been a fan of kind of just only listening to the additional, because it kind of ignores whatever that trend line is, or it's just harder for the layperson to be like, you know, in relation to what or where are we? So, you know, either even just the way it's written in options 2 or 3 feels like it's much easier to understand, like, what are we trying to do? And just based on this conversation and the presentation too, it feels like we're kind of making a decision between, you know, definitely Oregon has been in the range of the 57 to 62, you know, historically, but the trend has been going down. So we're trying to get us back to what the potential sequestration of Oregon lands have demonstrated in the past. But again, that trend is going down. So there's work to get us back up there. And it's just kind of how aggressively are we going to be investing to make sure that we can take advantage of that And so, and it does come back to, what are the risks and that risk assessment and how does that impact our ability to be able to sequester? And definitely seeing the drop in 2020, wildfire, but then also droughts and other kind of natural activities impact that. So it doesn't feel like we're necessarily trying to go above the historical, but if we took option 3 the most and recommended, option 3, then that would be definitely a much more kind of the upper end of historically, maybe at least from 2000 and forward, since that's the data that we have, that we potentially could achieve.
Thank you, Commissioner Steckler. Let's go to the last slide and then just because I want to make sure we get this in here, we do need to shift to our next topic, I think. But Alan, I will.
Could I, this on this point?
Yeah, okay.
Jen, could you go up to slide 11, go up 3? So the question of additional to what gets answered by option 2 and option 3. But just to be clear about what option 2 does, it says it takes the 5-year average and then adds that 5 and 9.5 from the previous goal that the commission set to that 5-year average. And so it sets it as a numerical target for total sequestration. So that's what ends up happening in 2. And 3 is a little bit more ambitious. The 2 dots go up higher. Thanks.
Now let's go down 4 slides, because one of the things we wanted to make sure commissioners knew and that members of the public know is that go one more down, is that we several more down all the way back down to the end of this section, the last slide. We did Oregon Department of Energy did open a public comment period on the 8th, and that public comment period will be open until July 2nd. And we have a series of questions that we'd love to get feedback on. Certainly, we'll get any feedback from public comments. But we have specifically identified 4 questions that we're hoping to get input on. So that the information is here about where you send your comments, and we will synthesize all those, and commissioners will review the public comments before we vote, hopefully in July. So with that, I think I will close this agenda item and recommend that we move on to our transformation or integrated greenhouse gas emission reduction project, which is a mouthful. So I also, House Bill 3409 directed the commission with the support from ODO to conduct regular forecasts of how the policies and programs Oregon has put in place to reduce sector-based emissions will reduce our emissions over time. And this forecasting is an important tool to help us assess our progress and consider what additional steps might be needed or might be available to reach our emissions reduction goal. And I want to thank the public for all the input we received on the draft scenarios and measures that were released in March. We received over 370 pages of comments on the draft measures and scenarios. I also want to thank staff for the thorough consideration of a great deal of public input on the draft measures and scenarios and the changes that were proposed to address the comments. The updated gap measures and scenarios were posted on our May meeting page and then copied to our June meeting page as well. So they're the same. It's the same report. We just had posted it in May and wanted to repost it in June to make sure people saw it. And I'd like to welcome Chris from Sustainable Solutions Group, who will be talking to us about the draft modeling results of the and the work on the measures and scenarios. But first, turn it over to Jamshed and Tori to kick us off on this topic.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, today we're going to discuss the greenhouse gas emissions calculations associated with the gap measures and scenarios as part of the TIGR project. I'm joined today by my colleague, Tori Leahy, as well as Chris Strashok from Sustainable Solutions Group, or SSG. Chris and the SSG team have a long history with this project. Chris was the principal modeler for the first TIGR analysis completed in 2023 and has been working with us throughout both phases of this iteration of the project. He'll be presenting the results from the analysis to you today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Before we get into the results of the greenhouse gas emissions calculations, I wanted to provide a brief rundown of our presentation today. Tori will first provide a brief reminder of the scope of the project and recap the results from the first phase, where we looked at Oregon's progress toward meeting its greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals based on the programs and policies currently in place. I'll then discuss the updated list of gap measures and scenarios, including changes that we made following that public comment period. Chris will then present the results, the draft results from calculating the greenhouse gas emissions reductions from those measures and scenarios. He'll also discuss some of the findings with respect to data center load growth. When we last presented to you in March, there was a lot of discussion about data centers, their potential proliferation in Oregon, and the corresponding impacts to greenhouse gas emissions. Given that, we wanted to provide a bit of a deep dive into our data center related findings. And then finally, we'll cover the project's next steps. So I'll turn it over to Tori for our overview first.
Thank you, Jamshed, and thank you, Chair McDonald and Commissioners, for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm Tori Leahy, Climate Action Research Analyst at ODO. The TIGR project is aiming to answer the question of whether the state has the program and policy infrastructure in place to meet its greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. The goals we are focused on are based on Executive Order 20-04, which called for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2035 and 80% by 2050 as compared to 1990 levels. The other aspect of the project is to identify and assess additional opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or identifying potential new programs or changes to existing policies and programs that will further reduce emissions to help the state reach its climate goals. Next slide, please. So the first iteration of TIGR completed in 2023 found that Oregon's existing policies and programs, along with the federal CAFE standards, would enable the state to reach its 2035 emissions reduction goal if all were fully implemented and funded as planned. It's worth noting that we have seen emissions reductions since 2019, approximately 5 million metric tons CO2e as seen in this visual, which includes our updated forecast. In 2025, we have updated this forecast, and you can see here the red horizontal line at the top represents our business as usual scenario, which is greenhouse gas emissions with no climate action programs or policies in place. The horizontal line in green shows the trajectory of emissions with our existing programs and policies. As you can see, there's a gap between our current path and our 2035 and 2050 goals. The gaps here have changed a bit as we've finalized the analysis, but the message is the same. Oregon does not have the program or policy infrastructure in place to enable the state to meet its 2035 or 2050 goals. Currently, we have the infrastructure in place to meet the 2035 goal in 2039. And for 2035, there's a gap of 5.48 million metric tons CO2e, and for 2050, a gap of 13.5 million metric tons CO2e. The primary driver of these gaps is the anticipated load growth demand of data centers. On a positive side, this graph does show that the measures of the policies and programs currently in place are having a discernible impact. And without them taking into account projected population and energy demand growth, the state's trajectory, as shown by the business as usual line, would be far worse from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective. Next slide, please. So in breaking out the results just a little bit further, this slide provides a visual of the emissions by sector and electricity use in both the BAU and BAP scenarios. On the left, the BAU, which is the business as usual scenario, shows those emissions without climate action programs or policy intervention. And the right is our BAP, our business as planned scenario, incorporating those policies and programs currently in effect. As you can see, the emissions growth is significant under the BAU case, with especially large increases in electricity use and significant emissions in the transportation sector. These emissions are addressed mostly and almost entirely by HB 2021, which is the requirements for the state to meet clean energy 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2040. And then the Climate Protection Program, which requires fuel suppliers and large stationary sources to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels by 50% by 2035 and 90% by 2050. The graph on the right is showing those impacts that our existing programs and policies are having. And for the analysis just completed this past fall, we took into account a range of new programs that were not in place during the 2023 analysis, including many of those related to commercial and residential energy efficiency and electrification. In the graph on the right, you can see that there are still significant remaining emissions from electricity use and in the food and agriculture sectors, but overall measures currently in place are significantly bringing down emissions virtually in all sectors. Because there is a gap between Oregon's goals and the projected emissions reductions, we have evaluated some emissions in those specific sectors. I will now hand it back to John Chett to discuss the updates to the gap measure and scenario list. Next slide,
Before
please.
we go into the next slide, just wanted to clarify one thing, that HB 2021 only applies to the investor-owned utilities, not the consumer-owned utilities, and that becomes important when we start talking about data centers.
Thanks, Alan.
Commissioner Sharon?
Yeah, toward that end, so what are you assuming about data centers and load growth in IOU territory? Because you're on the one hand saying load growth is going to drive up emissions in the electricity sector, but on the other hand, you're saying that investor-owned utilities are going to hit their HB 2021 targets. And I'm not sure either one of those two things is borne out by the data that's now coming out to DEQ and the commission.
Yeah, so all of TIGR modeling, including TIGR 1.0, has been modeling for success. We're not modeling that we won't meet our goals.
Yeah.
We do have some scenarios that look at whether or not what happens if we don't meet those goals. But HB 2021 is still the law of the land, and we're assuming they'll be met. That means that for investor-owned utilities, the data centers that are located in their service territories will add to their load, but that will also be required to be 100% renewables by the 2040 timeline. We also, and we're using the Northwest Planning Conservation Council's forecast for that. We did the high forecast, but when you see coming up, Commissioner Sharon was show you the scenarios where we modeled their medium and their low to see what happens. It's pretty dramatic what happens. We almost meet our goals in the low scenario, but and then so we're using their forecast for data centers, which have us increase data centers through 2030, and then it kind of drops off. And then finally, we had to make a decision about how much of the load is going to show up in the investor-owned utilities, and how much was going to show up in consumer-owned utilities service territory. When Odo created a data center dashboard and looked at where those locations were existing and where ones were being proposed. And what we realized was that it was about 50-50. And so for modeling in this for TIGR 2.0, we assumed 50% of the load growth in data centers are going to occur in IOU territory, and 50% was going to occur in COU territory. Because COUs are not required to comply with HB 2021 to get 100% renewables, we assume that they would be market purchases, and that would be the default DEQ emissions factor for those emissions, which is not zero. It's small. It's like it's an efficient It's set by DEQ, which is helped set by California Air Resources Board, but that number is set basically based on a very efficient combustion turbine as market purchases.
Okay.
And it's more detailed than that. It takes a while to do that. So they only reset that number every 5 years because it's complicated. But so it's not zero, but it's not a coal plant.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks, Commissioner Sharon, for the question. So with the finding that we were no longer on track to meet our greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, we developed a set of gap measures, activities which, if implemented, would reduce emissions. Rep. Gamba, do you want to?
Well, just back to that last point that Mr. Zelenko was explaining, when you do that calculation around the efficient gas turbines, are you taking into account leakage of methane in the system before it's burnt?
It's actually a lot more complicated than that. It's helped set by California Air Resources Board. DEQ has adopted that. Washington has adopted that, and so it's a West-wide number that's being used for the whole market on the West. The calculation's rather complicated, but it basically takes the emissions from the generation, so it doesn't go upstream, but it does take into consideration because the generation. So in Oregon's DEQ sector-based, the emissions would have to occur within the state of Oregon and be attributed to that. So anything that happened in Canada would not be part of our emissions for the state of Oregon, and it wouldn't be included in our sector-based emissions. And so when they do that calculation, it's not just the gas combustion, it's looking at the market, what kind of purchase there are, and doing a complicated calculation to get to that number. And there's we could do a whole seminar on that, but we won't.
Yeah.
Does that help, Rep. Gamba?
Well, I would strongly encourage us to not do it by that methodology because we're all in the same climate. So whether the gas that's being drilled for and stored and transported for the use in Oregon, if those emissions occur in Canada or Wyoming or wherever they occur, is irrelevant. We are the market that is drawing that.
Right. And our goals are based on our sector-based inventory, which is just emissions in Oregon. And I see Colin McConaughey from DEQ's on here who can speak very eloquently and better than I can about this topic.
Thank you. I was just going to recognize Commissioner Lem, if you would just hold your question. I assume that
Sure.
Colin wants to speak to this point.
Sure.
Is that great? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you confirm you can hear me? I haven't spoken
We
yet
can,
before.
yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, Colin McConaughey from DEQ filling in for Director Felden. I just wanted to directly address Rep. Gamba's question about upstream methane leakage and whether that's taken into account in DEQ's greenhouse gas accounting for the electricity sector, and specifically the use of that unspecified, as Troy put in the chat, what we call our unspecified emission factor of 0.428 metric ton CO2e per megawatt hour that we attribute to those unspecified purchases as reported by utilities to DEQ. That 428 number does not account for upstream methane. We do not use what essentially that would entail using a life cycle accounting framework for that sector, and we do not do that for the electricity sector as it's reported to us. It's from the direct emissions from the generation portion, if you will, not from extraction of any fossil fuels that go into that generation. And the 428 number was derived many years back when evaluating the emissions from units throughout the WEC that are at the margin. And we not recently, a few years ago now, reevaluated that and actually came up with a very similar number many years after that was originally derived. So we've continued to use the 0.428, but that is something that's eventually going to be evaluated further in the future.
And I'll also point out there are three separate inventories to keep in mind. One we just talked about, the Natural Climate Solutions Natural Working Lands Inventory, which is about sequestration and storage. Then there's the sector-based inventory, which is just the emissions within the state of Oregon. And then the third one is the consumption-based inventory, which goes beyond the borders of Oregon and includes almost doubles the amount of emissions. And that would be where this gets taken into consideration, Rep. Grambow, where the upstream of all supply chain for everything gets taken into consideration. So if, for instance, cement were manufactured in a more greenhouse gas friendly way out of state, it would be captured there, but not in our sector-based inventory.
And is leakage captured in the current consumption-based inventory? Is that something, Colin, you can answer, or do we follow up on that?
It depends on what type of leakage you're referring to, Chair. But certainly some leakage would be if we are consuming less products produced in state, and Oregon consumption patterns shift to more out-of-state produced products. The consumption-based inventory is well equipped to be accounting for that. Yes.
Commissioner Lamb.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, yes.
I can see you're only partway through the presentation, so I just have a general question, and I'm going to take too much of your time. I was trying to go through the materials at the same time. I understand that what you're showing in the main slide is the scenario to reach the goal. I understand what you're saying, Director Zelenka. That's the mandate. Can somebody at some point just say something about the other scenarios that are described in the materials, the alternative scenarios, for example, without federal support? That seems to be a key question. So at some point, if you can speak to that, I appreciate it.
You can be Mr. Segway in about 5 slides, Commissioner Lim.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Jamshed.
Yeah, thank you. We will we'll go through the scenarios and we'll describe both what they were, what we looked at, and then what the results were. Just a moment. Before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about these gap measures. So the gap measures, as I was mentioning, are activities which if implemented would reduce emissions. I do want to emphasize that the gap measures should not be viewed cumulatively as a plan. We're not recommending the implementation of any measure or suite of measures. And we expect that if any were to be evaluated for adoption, economic and other considerations would need to be part of the discussion. Our contribution here is to identify the potential greenhouse gas emissions reduction impacts of the measures. In addition to the measures, we also identified the scenarios that represented some of the uncertainty regarding future energy demand and uptake of particular low-emitting technologies like electric vehicles. Back in March, we opened a public comment period on the draft gap measures and scenarios. The list was preliminary, and our hope was to get feedback that would help refine the measures, what measures to include, and what assumptions to use to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We received a lot of feedback on the original list, and we made some significant adjustments as a result. So first, we removed all the specific measures that we had included related to the food and agriculture sector. We met with agriculture sector partners as well as ODA, and based on those discussions as well as the public comments that we received, we decided that a more in-depth discussion would be needed prior to determining what measures could be included as part of that list. What we have included is a gap measure that assumes the emissions reductions that have occurred in the agriculture sector historically will continue. We've seen a modest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the agriculture sector over time. Between 1990 and 2023, greenhouse gas emissions from the sector have declined approximately 9%, which is about a 0.3% reduction per year. The measure that we include assumes that reduction will continue at the same rate going forward. We expect to start a more in-depth conversation with agriculture sector partners next year about opportunities to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We also removed some measures to avoid any potential duplication and to reflect significant feasibility constraints that were noted in the public comments. For example, we had a few energy efficiency measures that we removed to avoid any chance of double counting emissions reductions. Also, in response to feedback regarding their feasibility, we made changes such as removing the measure that described home fuel cell adoption and off-road electric vehicle sales. Third, we made changes to combine measures that were largely similar. For example, we had two measures that involved the deployment of solar energy, and we collapsed those into a single measure. And finally, we did add one measure related to increased aviation efficiency based on assumptions that were included in the Oregon Energy Strategy. There were some other measures that were recommended during the public comment period, such as addressing emissions associated with wildfires. While TIGR is focused on sector-based emissions, understanding some of the nature-based actions that can mitigate the emissions impacts of wildfires are addressed as part of ODO's Natural Climate Solutions work, and you'll hear more about that during next month's commission meeting. Next slide, please. So we ended up with 31 gap measures, and this is the full list. This list, along with more details on the assumptions for each measure, is available in the materials on the Commission's website for today's meeting. Before I turn it over to Chris to present the modeling results, I do want to make 2 points about the results that you'll see here today. First, the results presented here are still considered drafts. There could be some minor changes to the results as we review them over the next few weeks and prepare the final report. Second, rather than discussing each of the 31 measures today, we wanted to provide you with an overview of some of the key takeaways. The full results following our thorough review will be available in a draft report that we are planning to release for public comment by early next month. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
I'm going to make a third caveat to all of that, Jamshed, which is that all of these are above and beyond reductions that would have occurred because of the CPP and HB 2021. So there's a bit of subjectivity into what we think would occur. We weren't trying to figure out exactly how HB 21 is going to be fulfilled, nor were we trying to figure out exactly how the CPP. So these are intended to be above and beyond what would occur in there. So they actually do drop the line, but you also see that there's lots of little ones. Because of that, there are lots of little ones, little wedges, as opposed to some big lever programs like HB 21 and CPP, which cover the bulk of this. So these are additional above and beyond. So they're necessarily going to be smaller.
Thanks, Alan. Absent further questions, I think we go to the next slide, and Chris, I'll turn to you.
Thanks, Jamshed. And thank you, Chair and Commissioners. My colleague Yul and Brooke, who are on the call, and myself appreciate the opportunity to discuss these results with you and explore them further. As mentioned earlier, my name is Chris Strashik. I'm a principal with SSG, and I'm the principal modeler on this project as well. Just a little kind of, I guess, overview of SSG and the experience we bring to this project for those who haven't met us yet. We are a worker-owned cooperative. So really, our mission is to support clients in this climate crisis. That's our really main goal here. So we work really hard with our clients to get to those climate futures that are low carbon and help kind of try and solve the problem that we're in. We've done over 200 climate action plans across North and South America, from small communities to states to countries. So we're familiar with every level of opportunities to make this change happen. And we bring a full suite of modeling, analysis, implementation, engagement, and communication strategies to each of these projects as needed. We're familiar with the full scope of the project from beginning to end. If you go to the next slide. So our bottom-up approach ensures we are capturing the activities that use energy and generate emissions, and this gives us the detail we needed to craft meaningful implementable actions. So all the actions that we're modeling here are getting down to how many heat pumps do you need to put into a home, how many buildings do you need to retrofit, how many cars do you need to get off of the road, how much electricity do you need to put into a certain sector. So we're really down to the nuts and bolts of the activities that are part of the economy. Our scenario approach to exploring possibilities also allows us to look at ways of transforming how we generate emissions instead of optimizing historical trends. So we're looking at transformation in novel ways of making things happen. So being kind of thinking outside the box and exploring different pathways. We believe in being open about all the assumptions that go into the model and sharing the model logic itself. So, so you all have a level of confidence in the results as well. And although emission reductions is the goal most of the time, those results are not necessarily the end of the story. There are many co-benefits associated with low carbon futures, and we have the ability to layer economic impacts, public health impacts, and equity considerations on top of these as well. So we're making a just transition for everybody involved. You go to the next slide, please.
But we're not doing that for Tigger 2.0.
Doing some of it. So the model is an economy-wide system dynamics model. So that means that the elements in the system interact is as important as representing the elements themselves. So how all the elements in the economy interconnect and interact with each other are important. And so we capture those as best we can. And this integrated structure allows us to understand how one measure can influence another measure and how a collective set of measures can achieve a goal. So you're not just stacking measures on top of each other. There's an interaction in play between these different measures, and we capture that with our modeling methodology. And to the next slide, please. And last but not least, the information that we're modeling at is spatially disaggregated. So this is the spatial zoning system that we're using for this version of the Tigger model. So you can see it's mainly by county, but we also have some major urban centers in there as well. So all the data in the model is at this level. And so we could pull out analysis for each of these zones and explore that deeper if Odo or the commissioners wanted to as part of ongoing projects. So it's not just at the state level, we have it down to kind of these various levels of granularity, because rural areas versus urban areas have different needs and different outcomes and different priorities. And so understanding what those are and how these measures influence those areas is important for implementing these projects. Next slide, please. So now going on to the gap measures. So out of all the gap measures that we modeled, these are the 10 largest emissions reductions. They're not necessarily the best. They're not, we're not picking out necessarily winners or losers, but we just wanted to highlight kind of what were the bigger ones out of the list. And then although some of these numbers might not look significant, as Alan mentioned, these are above and beyond the policies and programs that Oregon already has in place. So, you already have the CPP, you already have HB 2021. So we're looking at the wedges, the slivers that go above and beyond that to understand, how we can move the needle on meeting that 2035 goal. And as we'll explore in a couple of slides, these measures could be used in the case of delays or the dissolution of other policies and programs. So, if something fell through in another place, you could use these as understanding kind of how can you build these up to kind of maybe fill those in. Next slide, please. So this is the same list, just looking at it in a graphical form for those brains who process it graphically. So you can give a sense of the whole bar, the dark blue and the light blue is the 2035 emissions gap. So this is the kind of the challenge that these measures are trying to address. And then the dark blue line is the progress that each of these measures make to meeting that, to filling that gap. So you can see here that data center loads not covered by HB 2021. So that is actually, looking at what if they had to bring their own clean power, or what if they weren't just using that unspecified grid value. What would that mean for the emissions reduction? So you can see, obviously that's a big one because that's a big part of the challenge that we're trying to address here. Other things like small commercial space heating or residential space heating, those ones are fairly large too, because you're really looking at a large portion of your economy, right? There's a lot of residential homes in Oregon that makes up a lot of our economic activity, as well as smaller kind of commercial use. So when you're addressing a large portion of your economy, you're going to see a bigger emissions reduction kind of wedge. Also, too, you can see industrial electrification and hydrogen fuel adoption. Both of those are in the industrial sector, so looking at the same thing from a different angle. So one is looking at what if we can electrify as much as we can in the industrial sector. The other one is what if we can switch out to, the fossil fuels for a low carbon hydrogen fuel option. And then you can also see the agriculture sector reductions that Jamshed mentioned earlier, looking at the trends that we were seeing in the agriculture sector as they're decreasing for a number of different reasons. Go to the next slide, please. So a number of key takeaways from these gap measures. So there are likely multiple combinations of measures to close the gap. So while the gap measures in the study are not considered cumulative, so they are modeled all independently. So adding them up is not necessarily correct. There could be some double counting with it, or there would be some double counting if you did that. The results strategically indicate that the 2035 target could be met through an integrated implementation of these various measures. So, just by adding them up, you could see that there is a possibility, even though the number that you get from adding them up wouldn't be, wouldn't be representative of the outcome. But there is, there is possibilities there. Using clean energy for data centers loads not covered by HB 2020-01 is the largest gap measure, and we talked about that. So the high forecast of data center energy demands from the Northwest Power Council is the primary obstacle for Oregon reaching its 2035 decarbonization goal. So having that many data centers drawing that much load is a challenge. And the geographical placement of these facilities is critical. So as Alan mentioned, there's a 50-50 split between data centers going into IOUs and COUs as an assumption in the model. So if that shifted more to the COU versus the IOU, you would see, a larger gap at 2035 there. So any strategy targeting the power supply for data centers exempt from HB 2021 will play a pivotal role in meeting the 2035 emissions goal. Not all gap measures contribute significantly to closing the gap. So as I mentioned already by Alan and myself, you already have two big measures, and so even though these might be small numbers there, these are showing kind of proof of concepts that could be used to be scaled up into bigger programs if necessary in the future. So keep that in mind. And then this segues into the point that to close the 2035 GHG emissions gap, we need urgent action. So sector activities activities in our economy possess inherent momentum and require significant time to pivot. So for example, if I went and bought a natural gas furnace tomorrow, I'm not going to, in a year's time, want to go and buy a heat pump just because there's a rebate, kicking around to go buy a heat pump. So we need to understand kind of what are the barriers to making change now and create that urgency in the measures that we're exploring. So adopting more accelerated implementation timelines may become necessary to meet this 2035 goal. So that's the gap measures. I'm going to be moving on to the scenarios. I don't know, Chair, if we want to maybe have a little pause for questions around the gap measures, or do you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So thank you for raising that. Commissioner Dotson.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering from a methodological point of view, we talked a little bit about how sort of upstream methane emissions are not included in kind of our projections under the baseline scenario. I see things like hydrogen and renewable natural gas use, and I just end up wondering whether this sort of modeling imagines the use of like renewable thermal credits or hydrogen outside of our system. Are we focused on, are we consistently looking at emissions from within the states in these scenarios? I appreciate an answer to that. Thank you.
The hydrogen, we are assuming that it would be a clean hydrogen. So you're not replacing it basically with a blue hydrogen, which is essentially natural gas. So there is that assumption in there. Like the hydrogen that is used would have to be a clean hydrogen. Like otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
In the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Commissioner Dotson, all of the measures are treated consistently. So even the ones that have larger consumption-based inventory impacts outside of the state, only the portion of that program or action or policy that reduces greenhouse gas emissions within the state of Oregon is counted in this analysis for every one of these measures.
So
including the other programs or regulations already adopted that help get us towards meeting our goal.
So a thermal credit generated from capturing methane on a hog farm in the Midwest could not be used to, under your scenario, it's not calculated into the reductions. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Apologies. I think we've got Commissioner Thorndike next.
Yeah, just real quick on the sort of three-phase question, I guess, on the industrial electrification item. Just clarifying, is that referring to switching processes from non-electric sources to electric sources?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's not even across the board. There was, consideration about, we had consideration for like glass production would have less of an electrical transition versus like a refrigeration, or different things like that. So there was consideration on different processes within the industrial sector. So it's not just a blank slate, like all industrial processes can be electrified, because not all of them necessarily can.
Right. Then the second kind of related one is there anything on just focusing on industrial efficiency? I mean, we had an Energy Trust grant to improve our compressor. We had a large compressor and got to that saved quite a bit of energy. So I guess, that focus. And then the third part would be whether there's consideration given to just the opportunities for renewable electrical generation through industrial, either sites or processes, which isn't particularly enabled very well right now. Yeah.
Yeah, for the efficiency one, that one wasn't explored in this list of measures. I think it was, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, in the TIGR 1.0, but yeah, efficiency could play a part in that as well, for sure.
Two other points in response to that, Commissioner Thorndike. One is, again, remember, these are above and beyond what would have occurred to comply with HB 2021. What you did would have complied with HB 2021 for those resources. So this is above and beyond. And the second point I wanted to make is that all the assumptions in here are tied as closely as possible and consistent with the work that we did in creating the Oregon Energy Strategy. So we're using the same assumptions and the same data sets as much as we possibly can, so that the two analyses that were done, which were different purposes and different models, are as consistent as possible. So the things that came out of, we used the things that came out of the energy strategy to inform the measures that we're doing here for both the programs and regulations already adopted to help us meet the goals, plus the additional measures that we calculated how they might be able to, if they were to be moved forward into implementation, might help us get there as well to fill the gap.
Great. Yeah, I mainly just mentioned because I just anecdotally see, a lot of opportunities out there that have some barriers now. It might even be just the barrier might be a very high minimum charge based on your capacity. So you're not incentivized to become more efficient under a certain point. Things like that. I mean, it's just like thinking of what might be hanging out there that could be implemented that would get some benefit. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thorndike.
I'll also add, we do have a gap measure that's called non-climate protection plan industrial process efficiency by 2050, which might be partially addressing your question. And that's assumed to have a 1% annual improvement in process efficiency compared to previous year across industries that are not regulated in CPP. So again, it's beyond CPP. But that's, again, also assumed to be industry-wide. So there's going to be some industries that see like a 22% annual improvement or over the course of 5 years, and then some that do not see it. And so again, it's spread across industries, but that kind of addresses those efficiencies or potential efficiencies. And I also put the assumption for the industrial electrification in the chat, just so you can see what that includes.
Super.
That was super helpful. Thank you, Tori.
Of course.
Appreciate that. Commissioner Apter.
Thank you. I have a few different questions about some of the gap measures that are.
Want to go back a slide so that we're looking at the gap
Yeah,
measures?
Jen, go to the overall 31 list.
Great, thank you.
Oops.
So while you're doing that, I'll go ahead.
Down.
Oh, you're going the right way. You had it.
Oh, yeah. Slide 29.
And maybe before I jump in, just to clarify, you all are still interested in input and discussion about these, correct? Okay. Well, I did not closely read, I'll admit, all 350 some pages of public comment. I did do my best to skim and try to gather the highlights, and I appreciate the changes that have already been made in response to that feedback. But one that I was curious about was the low carbon fuels by 2050 multi-sector. There were quite a few comments expressing concern and skepticism about relying on RNG and hydrogen as major decarbonization strategies. And, if they are pursued, recommending they're prioritized for harder to decarbonize sectors. But as the current measure is written, it does seem like this is still intended to assess broad direct use. And I appreciate, Alan, what you shared in terms of the goal in ensuring that these measures are leveraging and building off of the work that's already been done in the Oregon Energy Strategy. And my recollection from the strategy's findings is that, again, those fuels should be reserved for hardest to electrify sectors. So that's one comment I had, just trying to do my best to uplift feedback received. And then I had one or two others if there's time.
I can start on that, and maybe Chris has something to add. But we had a lot of discussion around that measure, and we talked to the folks who were within Odo working primarily on the energy strategy, and what we are looking at here for the low carbon fuel measure, for the RNG measure, is in that hardest to electrify piece. We're not looking at it as sort of a broad scale solution, but as those areas where a shift to those more low carbon fuels would provide those emissions reductions, but not looking at it across the board, looking at it where electrification and other options were just not available or unlikely to be available. So it is consistent with sort of how we're thinking about it in OSIS in terms of those hardest to decarbonize areas.
Thank you, John. That's super helpful. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I also wanted to make a point that's been misconstrued or misinterpreted in other places, that these are not programs that we're doing through program design for implementation. We are merely calculating the potential of whatever that program might look like, or how it might be done, voluntary, involuntary, where it would be done, how it would be done, whether incentives, all that is way down the road. This is just the calculation of what's its potential to help us meet the gap, fill the gap.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I understand that. I think it was more so with an eye toward, let's not prioritize, limited time in this assessment toward reassessing those options and measures that have already gone through a significant analysis. One other piece I wanted to call out was around large loads, and just calling out, there were a number of comments, in support of the gap measure. What number is it? 4. But also calling out that there are many other potential measures that could address the significant emissions that we're seeing in COU territory, but across the board, such as large load efficiency goals or flexibility requirements. So thinking about what are those additional measures in addition to ensuring new large loads are supplied with clean energy. And I was curious how you all were thinking about that.
Yeah, so I think that's there's a lot of I think, potential options, but there's also sort of a lot of uncertainty regarding, what the data center, what it's going to look like, both in the near term in terms of what comes online and efficiencies that happen later on, and in terms of what potential things like demand response programs could be in place. For the purpose of this, we did sort of decide to simplify and just try to look at, what happens if we, put this this measure of requiring these new data centers to provide the clean power. I think those are really good questions and ones that I think we can continue to look at here. But also, we expect that during the next iteration of the TIGR process, we'll have a much better sense of what the landscape actually looks like in terms of data centers coming online in Oregon, and hopefully have a better sense of the technology efficiencies and other things that will impact sort of electricity load growth. And so it's a great point, and there's, I think, a lot of questions here and a lot of different permutations of this measure that we could go into. So I think those certainly something we'll take back and look at and see if there's something we can do here for this analysis. But I certainly expect we'll be able to in the future as well.
Colin, do you have something specific to the conversation that was just happening, or is your comment more a new topic?
Thanks, Chair. It is not a comment. It is a follow-up to Commissioner Dotson's question about use of renewable thermal credits, and just feeling it would be constructive to provide some input on that topic in regards to DEQ's programs, our emissions accounting, both under our greenhouse gas reporting program, which then means by extension our climate protection program, as well as our clean fuels program, all do allow for the use of renewable thermal credits as certified by MRETS to potentially, with some various strictures I won't get into, allow for the claim of use of biomethane and theoretically hydrogen, but there is a stricture I will explain, which is that we require that that fuel be allowed to be injected into the interconnected pipeline system, which FERC does not allow into natural gas interstate pipelines currently. So that's only theoretical. But point is, book and claim accounting is allowed under those programs. It sounds like from subsequent conversation and responses from Alan and others, they weren't really using expressly accounting for whether that book and claim would be used, just simply looking at what if we filled the gap with this fuel somehow, some way. But I don't want to speak too much for their approach, but that's how subsequent comments sounded. So but I want to acknowledge that those programs at DEQ do allow for that accounting framework that Commissioner Dotson was asking about.
Thank you, Colin. Commissioner Lim.
Thank you. Just one quick clarifying question. Also want to acknowledge how much work has gone into this, so appreciate the work and the presentation. Just among the gap measures list, which is what you were just describing, there is an element for aviation 26 and for marine number 30. So my clarification question is just whether or not there has been any in the non-gap measure list, has there been any policies or programs to address those subsectors in transportation? In other words, aviation and marine, or are these the first ones to address those subsectors, those modes?
Who wants to take that on?
I think we'll get back to you. We'll confirm that. Go back to you and confirm the number of measures that are included as part of the sort of businesses planned, right? What's currently in place is pretty extensive, and so let us go back and check on that, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Commissioner Lim. Representative Gamba.
So to just comment briefly on Commissioner Lum's question, and then I'll say what I was going to say. The Clean Fuels Program is driving investment in renewable diesel in the state, and renewable diesel is like one step away from airline fuel. And so as those markets shift. Any development that we can create in renewable diesel at this point will help to solve that problem, as well as, I think, the maritime fuel usage, which right now tends to be bunker oil. In any case, what I was going to say is a lot of this assumes that HB 2021 is going to work, which I think is not a good assumption. It had too many loopholes built into it. We're already seeing PAC's initial IOUs completely thumbing their nose at that work. And I don't think even PGE is going to hit the mark at this point. And as was pointed out earlier, that doesn't include the COUs, which is where half of the data center growth in the state is occurring. So I think it would be really important for the legislature to see a clear-eyed view, not a sort of if the world were working the way it was supposed to be working kind of view, as it's reported back to them. And then the last piece, when we do make our recommendations to the legislature, I would strongly recommend that we lean in deeply into all of the recommendations that we feel would be necessary to make data centers not a problem, because that's going to be a hot topic this year. I guarantee you there will be data center bills this year, and we need to hit the mark. We need to make sure that we are solving the problem while we've got all of this public outcry, which is apparently what this legislature needs to do things. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Gamba. And I realize I should be calling you Vice Chair Apter. So Vice Chair Apter, did you get all three of your points on the table, or did you have one more?
Thank you, Chair McDonald. I know I think we're getting close agenda time wise. Is that right? I was just, there was one I was curious. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, because I think we've got a light load of public comments today. But I maybe say if people want to give public comment today, please raise your hand now, and that'll help us manage the rest of our time during the meeting a little more carefully. And then Jen, if you can kind of send me a note or you just report back on how many hands are raised in about 5 to 10 minutes, that'd be great. No, back to you, Vice Chair.
Great. There were just a couple I was curious about, or one that was removed, which was the Energy Efficiency Incentive Program. I don't know if that was part of the attempt to consolidate or avoid double counting, as I think you said, Jamshed. Okay. I'm
I
happy
see
to
a
look
nodding
there.
head, but
Yeah,
that means
so-
yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Great. Okay.
For the record.
Just to address Representative Gamba's comment related to risks to HB 2021, and this is a perfect scenario segue into our scenario. So I'll hand it back to Chris if there's no other questions after this. But I just do want to say within one of our scenarios, or two of our scenarios, we did explore delayed clean energy, which does kind of raise the risks and the impacts to the gaps if HB 2021 is not met as written in law. And so we do plan to address those risks that, will occur within the report, just so you are aware. But again, it's not based on any recommendations. It's just information and the impacts to greenhouse gas emissions. So with that, I'll hand it back to Chris if you want to talk about our scenario results.
Slide 39, Jen.
Oh, maybe two back. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so as most mentioned, we did explore some scenarios. There's 4 scenarios we're going to be showing you today. One of them is the delayed clean energy, which is looking at House Bill I've said this so many times now, I can't remember the House bill number all of a sudden.
2021.
HB, because I have to say HB 2021 before. I can't just say House bill. Anyway, sorry. That was a brain thing. So instead of 2030, we modeled IOUs reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity sold to Oregon consumers to 80% below baseline by 2035. So basically, we're delaying the 80% kind of target by 5 years, but we're still showing 100% by 2040. So maybe not aggressive as recommended for showing kind of what what not meeting the bill would be. So it's still showing that the bill target or goals are met. It's just later in time. So a recommendation obviously could be to explore something further. A low data center. So instead of the high load growth, we modeled the low growth forecast that we got from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, and then there's a medium one as well. So they had 3 different projections. So the initial results you saw was the high version, which was consistent, which was in the OSIS or the state energy strategy. So that's why we picked that to be consistent. And then now we're looking at the low and medium data centers growth, and then a lower EV adoption. So instead of 100% rate of EV adoption by 2035, this is really pushed out farther. So 100% of adoption is not realized at all, and we're looking at kind of 57% of around 40 to 50% adoption between kind of light duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles by 2050. So really kind of delaying that action. So if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see the results of that. So this graph is showing the reduction or the change in the gap. So you can see the black line of the bar horizontal line is the 2035 gap that we've been talking about this whole time. And each bar is showing how the relative change to that gap. So the BAP, if we had a BAP bar up there, it would be right at the gap. And you can see that the delayed clean energy exceeds that gap, so makes the gap bigger, as well as the lower EV adoption. So maybe not surprising, because both of those actually delay the emissions reductions within the state. And then the low data centers and medium data centers kind of greatly reduce the gap, because we are obviously not putting as much demand on the grid for electricity, whether that's in or out of IOU, COU territory. So really kind of the amount of data centers that are coming into Oregon can greatly kind of influence that value. Next slide, please. So really, what are the key takeaways here? So lower data center growth leads to a significantly smaller gap. So, I think this point really speaks for itself. The less data, or the lower data center load that you have come online, the less energy that gets used overall. So, not pretty straightforward. Delayed clean energy deployment increases greenhouse gas emissions in the near term. So really because you're shifting that away from 2030 target to a 2035 target, which is where your goal is at, that's going to obviously make the 2035 target harder to reach, because you don't have that take up of clean energy before 2035 going forward. So again, probably not surprising. And then especially in combination with a high data center load growth. So those two in combination, as that data center growth is going up and the emissions are kind of remaining flat or the same, you're going to make it harder to reach that 2035 goal. Lower EV adoption rate increases GHG emissions more in the later years. So you're not really seeing a big impact, although it is higher or above the BAP in 2035. The 2050 actually goal is much farther away for the ED adoption action. So looking farther in the future, because you're really because we already have EV adoption in the system right now, and you're just kind of smoothing that out or spreading or lowering the rate of adoption, kind of flattening that line out. It's really kind of in the longer or the farther away points that you're seeing a bigger impact of that one. And then delayed clean energy deployment and lower EV adoption leads to a larger gap and the need for additional GHG emission reduction actions. So that's where we kind of mentioned this or peppered it a little bit throughout the presentation. Scenarios where programs and policies are delayed or lost means that Oregon needs to find measures to replace the function of these policies or risk meeting the state's emission reduction goals. And that's kind of where the gap measures come into play, is like if some of these are at risk of not functioning properly, what other measures can be brought in to, either strengthen that up or replace maybe those policies or measures. That is the scenario results section. Again, Chair McDonald, I don't know if you want to pause for some. I'm not sure the timing of this. So if you want to pause for some questions, or I can keep going into the data center section, and we can, which is only 3 more slides, and we can go from there. I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, I Jen, have you seen many hands raised folks who want to give public comment?
I didn't see any hand raised, and it doesn't look
Okay.
like anyone filled out the form, so I think we're good on public comment.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, we might not be good on public comment, but we don't have a lot of, we don't need to save a lot of time for public comments, but thank you, Jen. Commissioner Lim.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I just have one question/comment about this alternative scenario results, because I actually find this to be extremely important and useful, at least from the perspective of the overall commission's thinking about its work and so forth. I understand the mandate to identify a technical means to meet the goals that are set. That's really important work. The alternative scenarios, I think, to the extent they can be documented, are also extremely important because it shows feasibility. It goes to feasibility and sort of informs a discussion about how the path can proceed forward. Your slide is a good summary, but I think I noticed in the written materials, just to confirm, that you also have another element of this, which is lack of federal support. I think that's actually a very important element of the big picture of this. It's like we may have a number of years ago assumed that we could reach goals to a certain degree with federal support, meaning federal funding, federal regulatory support. And it's just, I think, important to acknowledge that some of those things we might have assumed in the external environment have changed. And so these alternative scenarios are really quite important for maybe not as much, the technical analysis informs these policy questions, these larger questions about feasibility. So if you want to comment, that's sort of just, I'm hoping that federal question gets pointed out. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. 2 points. One, great minds think alike, Commissioner Lim. We're doing a biennial energy report Burr article exactly on that topic. What's the impact of federal actions on meeting our clean energy strategy and clean energy future? So stay tuned for that. We'll see that later in the fall. To the degree that they take away incentives and tax credits, it makes it harder for us to achieve our goals and maybe slow it down. But the way that this Tigger modeling works is that we're assuming success and that we're not assuming that CPP nor HB 2021 are not met. So the modeling assumes that we still meet those goals. How we meet those goals and how hard it's going to be is a completely different question. So for the modeling purposes, the federal actions of taking away incentives and other kinds of things like that don't impact making the requirement by law of meeting the goals of those two big lever programs. Again, 95% or so of the emission reductions from the programs and regulations already adopted that to get to where we have still a bit of a gap is from those two big programs, which are still in place. So it underscores their import for the state of Oregon that HB 2021 and CPP need to be implemented and funded as planned. Otherwise, the gap becomes even bigger.
And I'll just add too, as this current analysis does not include cost considerations, that's in part why we will not have quantitative analysis on the federal impacts, but we do plan to include a qualitative analysis, just again, kind of illustrating that yes, this will make things more expensive, and there are barriers that exist because of the federal impacts. But yes, again, it will not include quantitative at this time. And I'll just add too, consistent with the energy strategy, as we've been doing our best to be, the electrification is the least cost pathway identified in the energy strategy. So we will emphasize that as well in the TIGR analysis, that regardless, it is going to be more expensive, but it is the least cost pathway. So that's where we're driving those priorities.
For commissioners, I'm going to suggest we get through the rest of the presentation and then take our break. People can let some of this percolate and for a few minutes and then come back for the discussion, just so people know what's coming. So back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. If you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so focusing on data centers. So this is looking at the load forecast. So again, to reiterate, we're using the high forecast from the Northwest NWPCC. And basically, these two graphs are showing kind of similar things, but the graph on the left is showing the percentage of all electricity used in Oregon. So out of all the electricity being used in Oregon, what percentage is being consumed by data centers under the high load forecast? So you can see in 2023, which is our base year, 15% of all electricity in Oregon is being used by data centers. And then with the high load forecast by about 2030, about roughly 36, 37% of all electricity. So over a third of all electricity in the state is being consumed by data centers. So it's a large challenge to tackle. So obviously the lower ones would be lower, but this is the kind of the worst case scenario, if you want to call it that, for the state. So just to kind of highlight that for you all. And then what that kind of converts to, or the graph on the right, what that converts to in gigawatt hours. So, you're looking at going up, adding an additional by 2050-ish, adding an additional 30,000 gigawatt hours of electricity consumption. Right now, Oregon is consuming roughly 62,000 gigawatt hours of electricity. So again, a large amount of electricity, kind of a demand added, which, as we've been talking about, would make HB 21 a little challenging, because you have to add, a lot of renewables to meet that demand as well. The next slide. Sorry.
I will point out that the reason the graph on the left is flat is a function of the NWPCC's forecast, which has data centers coming on heavy and strong through 2030 and then drops off dramatically, and this has a modest low amount of increase. So using their forecast is why it has a steep increase and then flattens off.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
Exactly. And then the next slide shows kind of the emissions forecast, which we kind of touched on a little bit already in the other slides. But this is looking at the data center emissions through 2050. So the orange line is the business as usual. So that's looking at the addition of data center load growth, so that all that electricity that's coming online, and without HB 2021. So basically, if HB 2021 wasn't happening or didn't happen, and all those data centers came online, this is the emissions that would be added to the state. And so that's similar to the slide way up above that we were talking about, that was looking at the BAU, that electricity use kind of wedge. And then the green line is the business's plan. So this is looking at the emissions impact of HB 2021 being applied to the portion of data centers that are in IOUs. So again, this could fluctuate depending on how many data centers are in IOUs versus COUs, but with the assumption about 50-50, you can see this would be the impact of that. So moving from the orange line to the green line. So the takeaway from this graph is that obviously data center location matters, and HB 2021 is important in bringing data center emissions down from where they would be otherwise. And then last slide that I will be talking about, please. So the takeaways here, I think, pretty self-explanatory. Data centers are by far the largest contributor to the 2035 and 2050 gap. So this is, especially compared to the TIGR 1.0, where data centers weren't much of a thing. It's very new kind of coming online area of conversation. It's bringing a lot of missions with it. And if all new data centers are required to use only clean energy, the 2035 gap shrinks by approximately 2.56%. And this could be more. So this is, clean energy by 2050. So you could ramp that up higher or be, more in line with HG 2021. So however you draw that line, you could shrink that gap more or less. But this is just assuming kind of a flat line, kind of, they have to kind of slowly, or not slowly, but gradually use clean energy. And then number 3, lower data center growth load leads to significantly lower GHG emissions. So reducing the gap and bringing Oregon closer to its goals. So, managing how many data centers are coming to the state could be a viable way would also relate to managing your emissions as well.
Thank you, Chris. Tom Shed, do you have a wrap-up slide?
I do. I do. One more slide. So thank you, Chris. Just commissioners, in terms of next steps, the final report that we're drafting will include the results from our forecast of greenhouse gas emissions reductions based on the programs and policies currently in effect. It will also include a discussion of the gap measures and scenarios and the associated emissions reductions calculations that Chris described here today. We expect to begin a 30-day public comment period by early next month, and then we'll issue the final report once we have a chance to integrate those comments. And we hope that the report will inform the Commission's forthcoming report to the legislature and its recommendations. So I think we'll, per the Chair's direction, we can pause here, but we're happy to answer any of other questions you have.
Let's go ahead and go to break and then come back and discuss. And we can go for another, so let's do a quick break of 5 minutes and be back at 11:47 or sooner. And then we'll have a little more time for this topic once people come back. I think we can cover our last agenda item probably a little quicker than we had planned, but I don't want to shortchange it too much. So anyway, please be back by 11:47. Thank you. If folks could reassemble and please turn on your video to let us know when we've got a critical mass. And actually, we know that not everybody can stay on camera during the meetings, but to the greatest extent possible, we appreciate having people on camera when they can be. Good. Okay, well, let's get going again. I don't know that we have critical mass yet, but I think we should get back to the discussion of the results we just heard about, as well as the measures and scenarios that went into it. Well, happy to open it up to questions. Commissioner Washinsky. Oh, you're on mute, maybe.
Do you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so maybe less a question, more just an invitation. I really appreciate the fact that the TIGR analysis is downscaled to the county and urban area level. And there's actually a lot of effort being made at the local level to understand what contributions to climate mitigation local jurisdictions can make, and being able to partner with the state to better understand what some of these gap measures can be implemented at the local level, I think would be really productive both for the state and for local jurisdictions. As I've mentioned in previous meetings, we're getting ready to finalize our own climate plan, which we're calling the Climate Justice Plan, and I think this is a important initiative for us, but would be strengthened and made better through additional collaboration with the state on that. So that's just an invitation. It's maybe a persistent theme of mine that collaboration with locals is desired. The other thing I want to mention, and maybe something I saw missing, and I've hit on previous commission meetings, is that the one scenario that really isn't modeled there is unleashing the clean energy revolution that I think is somewhat held back through government regulation here in the great state of Oregon. And I know Representative Gamba has made this an important part of his legislative priorities. But just, by way of a quick example, I think during the last commission meeting, I mentioned there's about a $7,000 regulatory tax in the state of Oregon for, when it comes to wanting to put rooftop solar on your home. Just a quick example, Oregon statute has a higher snow load requirements than Minnesota. I understand, we have some snowy parts of the state up in the mountains and what have you, but we don't get as much snow in most places as the state of Minnesota. So, there are a lot of potential improvements that can be made to state policy, both legislatively and administratively, to help unleash renewable energy generation, both at the utility scale, but I think more importantly for households at the household scale. So just something to consider there. And then finally, as we consider the implications for equity, I think one area that I don't see discussed a lot within policy circles is the, as I think Commissioner Dotson mentioned, the 1970s. Well, the LIHEAP program, the energy assistance programs that we still rely on today to make sure some of the most low-income Oregonians can heat their homes in the winter and, have the opportunity to have energy efficiency upgrades made. They still exist. They're still important. And they're still underfunded in many ways. And so we have the opportunity maybe to look at those programs and think about, well, how can we leverage that existing infrastructure, right? There's a pipeline that's there. How do we get more out of it in order to make sure that especially low-income Oregonians are able to benefit from the changes in technology that allow them to heat and cool their homes or heat water more efficiently at less cost than previously possible. So just a few here to do the good stuff. Let's figure out how we utilize existing pathways to help those Oregonians who are in the most need. And let's work collaboratively between the state and local jurisdictions who are trying to, get some of this stuff done. Thank you.
I'm noticing in the chat, I can't tell whether we're still recording or not. Looks like we are. Jen, can you confirm that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Representative Gamba.
Just really quickly, I want to respond to John. You're 100% right. Some reading I've been doing recently points out that in Australia, you can build solar for about half of what you can in Oregon. And a lot of that has to do with our permitting and our building codes that are over the top, as you point out. So I think there is a big room for improvement there, and it's something I'm very interested in.
Thank you, Representative Gamba. Commissioner Dotson.
Thanks. Just a cautionary tale, because sometimes it's tempting to compare something that is done in this state with something done in another state and drawing a conclusion about it. And it would be good to understand the basis for our state's actions rather than, could it be that another state has done something woefully inadequate and somehow we're sort of saying, well, if they can do it that way, we should too. I don't know the answer to that question. I just think the things can spin out of control if you don't do that kind of analysis.
That's a really great point, Commissioner Dotson. Commissioner Lamb.
Thank you, everyone, for the information. Can I ask if the team could put up the slide that shows the business as usual, and then the other half of the slide shows the business as planned scenario? That's what I might have called the old days the central scenario. Yeah.
Showing the sectors. Can you ask your question while we're waiting for it, or?
Sure. So it's been really helpful actually to have this presentation of the TIGR work come to the commission while in process and then at this stage. And so certainly appreciate having the chance to better understand the work. I'm sort of framing it up. It's not everything, and there are different elements of work that we're seeing. The reason why I asked if we could look at the slide is because it does show us, to me, it shows us the nature of the challenge that we have. And I just want to say a couple of things.
I think you're looking
slide
for the
27,
slide
Jen.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, that's the one. Yeah. And the only thing I just want to point out to you is, of the sectors, other people know a lot more about certain areas than I do. But I've worked in the transportation sector for quite a while, so I know this is a scenario to show how we reach the goals. But I would just want to show you it's quite a challenge what you're showing to reach the goals for the transportation sector. And I just want to put that out there and maybe at least inform thinking about how we communicate this good work. What you're showing with the business's plan is basically a 50% reduction in emissions in the transportation. The bottom part of the chart goes from what looks like something under 20 million metric tons in 23 to maybe 10 around 2033, 35. So that's a 50% reduction in 10 years from now. And then a continued significant reduction, at least for this one sector. I was looking at that in comparison with some of the other sectors. I'm not sure. I can't quite tell whether all the other sectors are shrinking as rapidly, but that's not really my point. If you could, we don't have to share anymore. I just wanted to point that out visually as sort of just showing that to reach the goals still is a challenge. And that's also why I raised the point about federal support. I think actually federal support is quite important for us to have the funding to reach the goals, at least in the transportation sector. so I think there's just putting this work in the right context is maybe helpful. I've been trying to, think about it, make sense of it. I think it doesn't sort of fully, it's not intended to, if I can ask it that way, it's not intended to address big things like economic cycles or political changes. Like I would imagine that's not the mission of this work, but that is relevant, I think, for the discussion of the commission, to think about if there are political changes, political policy changes at the federal level, at the state level, which we're seeing, it goes to the feasibility of things. I mean, what I read is some really good analysis here about the technical feasibility of things. Certainly, a good example of that, again, with like electric vehicles. Early on, we had this idea about electric vehicles that, I was involved in, others were involved in, around 2008, which to me just seems like yesterday, by the way. There was a lot of optimism, and we've made tremendous progress. We have electric vehicles on the road, and the technologies have advanced so much. But in some ways, what we've faced is, political cycles and funding availability and things like that, which are driving the result on the ground. So I just think just putting this work in an honest way into that context, I'm trying to make sense of it that way, but you could tell me if I'm being unfair to the work. I think it's very good work. It shows us the path. If that's what we're trying to do, it charts a feasible path. So that's my main comment. But again, thank you. I know this is a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Lim. Jen, can you bring that slide back up? So you're absolutely right, Commissioner Lim. What Tigger's trying to do is to show, despite all the bad news that we have seen and the administration roadblocks that we've seen put in place, Oregon, on the other hand, has the policy infrastructure in place to get us there. Whether or not we have the political will and the budget and the programmatic continuity to do it is a separate question. So that's why we always say we're really close to meeting the goals if the programs and regulations already adopted that we have in place are implemented as planned and are fully funded. So the good news part of that is Oregon's ahead of the game, and we have a roadmap to help us get there. Can you go up one slide, Jen, to 26? The other good news part of these two slides is this first part on the very left of the graph, which for the longest time, if you extended this graph further back in time, it would be going up. But from 2019 to 2023, we've actually seen a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions overall in the state through looking at the DEQ data that we've seen. So that's good news. We actually have been doing some really good work because of all those program regulations that we put in place and through that implementation. But again, they have to be fully implemented and fully funded in order to get there. And is it hard? And is the administration making it harder? Absolutely. But we have a plan. We just have to do it.
Thank you, Alan. Commissioner Dodson, and then I'm going to suggest we move on to our last topic, and we can come back to this if we have any time left over.
Great. Just sort of building on what both Alan and Commissioner Lim just said. It sometimes goes unspoken, but I think we all know that, Oregon cannot by itself achieve the world's climate goals. The United States by itself cannot achieve the world's climate goals. China cannot by itself achieve the, it is a collective effort. And I think at the state level, what we should be obviously significantly impacted by this sort of boom and bust cycle that we're seeing at the federal level. But I think the policy infrastructure that Alan mentioned, I think, is really important, because if you accept that there is a cycle of boom and bust at the federal level, then it doesn't get more busty than it is right now, and so there could be changes. And our goal, I think, should be to do all that we can do to prepare our state for success in these areas. And having that policy framework in place, having the capacity in place prepares us to be able to capitalize on when opportunities exist at the federal level. If we throw up our hands, if we say we can't do it, if we say, all those things, that just makes that puts us in the position of trying to get back up to speed when the opportunities present themselves and potentially late to dinner. So I just thought I would add those points.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Dotson. That's a really important point. I would just encourage, as we move to the last topic, I would just encourage folks, if you think of additional questions or comments and recommendations, do get those to Jamshed and Tori as soon as possible. As we emphasized, this is still considered a draft, and so there's a little room to modify it. But if we're going to stay on schedule and get this done before we have to write recommendations, we need to keep it moving. So, we'll have this posted probably late Monday on our webpage. I always go back and listen to parts again because they're, it's a lot of dense material. So do that if you need to, and get any additional comments and questions that you have or recommendations. Thanks. Okay, on to the report to the legislature, and I will be short about this because we all know this. We do submit a biennial report to the legislature. Our last one, this one is due December 1st, as all of our reports are due now. And we've got a few things that we have to include based on our statutes, and other things that we can emphasize and report on. And most importantly, making recommendations. And I definitely heard a few recommendations today come up during the meeting that some folks were encouraging us to consider including. So we'll start making notes on that. But I'll turn it over to Jeff to kind of go through quickly the process and that he's proposing to us for getting this product done. Over to you,
Thanks,
Jeff.
Chair McDonald. Appreciate that. Next slide, please. So I'm going to keep this really brief. So we're proposing to use a committee structure to kind of drive development of this year's report. And similar to past year's reports, ODO staff will really take the lead in collecting the data, other inputs, and drafting the main body of the report, while we'll lean on the commission to really put together the policy recommendations that'll be part of that report. And we plan to combine the approved set of recommendations into the final report once they're ready later this fall. And so what we're proposing is to have a series of committees help prepare the information based on topics. So we've got an energy committee, transportation, and natural climate solutions. And then we'll have a report committee, which we're really thinking about as a group that'll pull all those recommendations together into one comprehensive whole, and address any cross-cutting topics that may have been elevated through the process. And then ideally, we'd want some volunteers from the topic committees to kind of join that report committee, so we have that cross-cutting feel to it. As far as timing, we're looking at the topic committees would meet in July and August, and the report committee would meet later in August through October to help craft those the final language. And so we're aiming to have at least 2 to 3 members per committee committed to the workshops, and including the chair. And then we'll follow up by email to solicit your input. And next slide, please. So this is our timeline. Like I mentioned, we're going to be kicking off the effort this month. We'll be initiating information requests, both from the public and state agencies. And then in July and August, we'll be really convening those topic committees and kind of coalescing all of the comments and input we receive. And then in September, we'll be having our first set of draft recommendations for review by the commission. And then we'll open public comment on those recommendations at that time. And then in October is really where what we're aiming for a discussion of those final recommendations that we bring into the report. November and December is really production time, and then submittal of the report by December 1st. Next slide, please. And so we are officially opening public comment for the report. We are looking to get input and information to consider. There's some questions on this slide for the public to consider as they're thinking about key messages that should be conveyed, addressing risks, barriers, and opportunities as well. And so there's a link here for where to send comments. We'll be looking to receive input until July 2nd. And as a reminder, we will be opening this back up for public comment in September for the draft final recommendations. And then we'll also be reaching out to agencies soon. So look for an email from the commission soon on that topic as far as getting input from the state agencies. So that's all I've got. I'll send it back to you, Chair, if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, just briefly, I will be reaching out in the next week or so to identify folks that I hope will be willing to serve on the committees. We'll so stay tuned for word from me about if I reach out to you. The committees will aim to meet no more than twice each month, but there will be work for commissioners who are on these committees to do in preparation, including looking at the public comment we get, reviewing some of the documents that were referenced in the memorandum for this agenda item, as well as some new documents that I imagine or background material that I imagine we'll hear about from some of the agencies when they provide our input. So so now I'll just open it up to questions or proposed modifications to the process schedule or key directions to staff on how to draft the narrative part of the report or the recommendations for the commission to consider, the committees to consider. Senator Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just marginally related to that, I wanted folks to know that this Tuesday, you and Elizabeth Ruther will be coming to the Senate Natural Resource and Wildfire Committee to report on natural climate solutions, workforce development, and training. And folks with that kind of interest are invited to either come or tune in. I imagine the meeting starts at 11:30 Tuesday. Look at the agenda. Looking at the agenda, I think you'll be up around 12:30.
Thank you, Senator Golden. I did mention that earlier in the meeting, but appreciate you emphasizing it and really appreciate the invitation for us to present on that topic.
Well, I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Vice Chair Apter.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McDonald and Jeff and everyone else who's already put so much great work into thinking through process and themes and the outline. Very excited to start digging in. Just one thought on question on the sub tables, the issue specific work groups. I was curious why buildings was not included, and in part I'm thinking about this just given the significant number of gap measures included in the Tigger 2.0 process that are related to the building sector. And then was also wondering, so I understand we have limited time. Don't want to ask too much of commission members. But was similarly wondering about the Natural Working Lands standalone group and curious if we're anticipating that there will be a significant amount of like substantive new policy recommendations for this coming legislature, recognizing all of the important implementation work that's underway and some of the great, next steps that were highlighted in today's presentation. I don't know if those we're expecting a lot more to build off of that, and just your thinking in terms of the need for a standalone group for this particular report.
Yeah, I think your point about the buildings sector is a good one, and especially as you note that there are a lot of measures that were identified as gap measures. So I think we can talk a little bit about how to best address that, either through one of the existing committees or the existing proposed committees. And then the other is that there were quite a few recommendations in our earlier reports, and I anticipate there will be some also in the associated with the goal discussion that we had. I did want to go back and just emphasize the fact that we are a little that we talked a lot about the numeric goals, but we didn't really talk a lot about the policy goals. But they are likely just as important, if not more important, for helping us make progress in this in natural and working lands. So, in my view, I think it's important for us to have to take a look at that. But I appreciate that tension between we only got so much time and so much capacity, and so I'll get back together with the ODOT team and the ODO team and talk about how to best address some of the gap measures focused on buildings and how we should best accomplish that. I also have been mulling over 2 to 3. Seems a little low to me. I know staff was trying to make it easier to schedule meetings, but I maybe am kind of thinking that 2 to 4 might be a better number. So we can talk a little bit more about that and come back next month with more specifics. Gabriella.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everyone. Gabriella Goldfarb, Environmental Public Health Section Manager, here on behalf of Director Hoppy from OHA. And I wanted to lift up the comment that Vice Chair Apter made, because kind of the direct health impacts of climate change driven hazards, a lot of them center around the built environment sector. So when we think about protecting against wildfire smoke, against extreme heat, that's kind of where the opportunity space is. So just wanted to underscore that. And I'll be checking with a director's office, but just to say that I think OHA would be interested in the cross-cutting committee. So thank you for that opportunity.
At least as we've been envisioning it, the committees would be made up of the voting members and the at-large non-voting members, but not the rest of the commission, which we don't have to necessarily stick with. But as we discussed a bit ago, we are hoping that all agencies will provide input to the report, both the narrative and the recommendations. And so that's at least how we were thinking about it.
Yeah, and that's fine. We can have, I'm just going to be flagging this for our director that's an opportunity, and it may end up being that it's just through the pathway, the agency input pathway might be the way we engage. But I mostly wanted to flag Commissioner Apter's perspective.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
There, why don't we go ahead and take the slides down and see each other a little bit better. Great. Other questions or proposed modifications to the process that has been outlined?
Chair McDonald, I'll just volunteer for whichever committee you want to put me on. Since I was part of the NCS subcommittee, I'm happy to serve there, even though, my own particular interest maybe veer a little bit more towards energy, but I want to be helpful to you and the rest of the committee as best as possible. So just sign me up where you think there's gaps. And I just wanted to say, in response to Director Goldfarb's comment, that I think the process would be strengthened with agency involvement if there's an interest and a willingness to participate in subcommittees, because so many of these issues do have implications across various departments. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
Real quick question. What's the proposed due date on these reports?
The due date is December 1st by statute. And so because there needs to be some production of it, we're hoping that we will be able to finalize things in October. So.
Okay, that's good. That gives us a little time to actually write legislation.
Great.
Could I'm curious, is last year's report on the webpage somewhere?
It is. There's
Okay.
a reports
Okay.
tab on our webpage or a page within our website. And you can scroll back through all the reports that we've done and look at the last one. And
Okay.
we did talk about this in our March meeting.
Right.
There was some good direction, which I think Jeff captured on things that we'd like to see a little differently in the next report. So you might want to look back at that as well as our last report.
Yeah, the more info like that you can share with us, the better. That'd be great. Because we did have that little sticky note program that was, as I recall.
Yeah, there's a full assessment of that in the report that was provided in advance of the meeting here. So
Okay.
it's all written
All
out.
right. All right. Okay, that's where it is. Oh, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Mickle. Commissioner Voss, I apologize. I still trip over it. Vashu. That is super helpful.
mouthful.
But
Vashutinsky.
the first two syllables get stuck in my mouth.
Yeah, it's a mouthful for sure. The other, I think today's presentation is actually a really good jumping off point for the report, this coming year's report, just because of that gap analysis. And just want to emphasize Rep. Gamba's point in the points in the chat. Just thinking about what kind of strategies we can help to put in place or recommend that be put in place to sort of help address this large additional challenge that we're seeing from data center loads.
I like Representative Gamba's list also. It's really good.
Commissioner Dotson.
Thanks. I'm just, as I'm looking over the draft report outline, the one thing I do think would be kind of a good direction from the chair and vice chair, perhaps, is to think about this question of how does the state best prepare for a change in the federal zeitgeist on climate? Because, there's definitely costs of inaction, impacts of climate change. All the things are super important, but to maximize our effort, going along with what Commissioner Lynn was saying and others, is what are the things we do now that would potentially set us up for greater success later, that maybe lower effort or lower cost things, but could be potentially very valuable. And one of the ideas I think about that is nobody in 2020 predicted that there would be an Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. Maybe there's a few people who had sort of fever dreams about that, but the states that had green banks that were up and running got that money. Oregon was not prepared to do that. And so like there's this, even if it was unfunded at the state level, if you had the institutional structure that was created, you could see yourself in a position where you could really capitalize on that.
Absolutely. And we've had a recommendation to establish a green bank in most of our reports for the last 8 years.
And there is movement on that, I believe. The Forge Act, right?
It was just an example.
It's a great example.
Yeah, no, it's a good example. And, we heard last month from the EQ that having that consumption-based inventory was, at least from our perspective, was part of what allowed us to get a more significant share of the federal dollars. So another good example. Commissioner McNichol.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Commissioner Dotson, I really agree with that example. And I guess the more specific we can be in direction to the legislature, I think the better. These sweeping policy statements are great and they're important, but we need action. And as we heard earlier, we need it now. So I'm really hoping we can have a focus on action and on specificity where we can. And we can't always do that, but we can often. So
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point, and that was one of the areas, perhaps it was your comment, and others, I'm sure, that it would be, the more specific we can be, the better. And, we obviously can't craft legislation necessarily. I guess we could try to do that, but we can certainly be as explicit as possible where we can. Commissioner Lynn.
Well, and I'd just like to add, actually, since you've opened public comment and we're talking about agency coordination and participation, any good ideas from any sources would probably be welcome. I would hope it's a lot harder to come up with a new idea. Maybe other people have already thought about some things that should be under consideration, and hopefully people would be willing to share.
Absolutely.
There are people that live and breathe this every day too, that I certainly.
Thank you. Other comments that would go to the order? Anything from our legislative colleagues here relative to suggestions on maybe not the specifics, but any kind of what's most helpful to you all as you try and
I would
just
legislation. I'd reiterate Representative Gamba's observation that data centers are going to be front and center in this session, and any work that you could put forward, suggestions, maybe input to the Governor's Advisory Council. I hope this commission has a role in that conversation, because it's going to be dominant and consequential.
Absolutely. And Commissioner Dotson is on the Advisory Committee Council, the data center group. So we've got a kind of a direct line, but I think that's an important point. Representative Gamba, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think Commissioner McNichol was spot on, that we need to be very, very clear, completely unambiguous, not worry about hurting feelings, not worry about calling out past failures. We need to be very clear, because people will read it in the most comfortable way possible. And the most comfortable way possible means they don't do much of anything.
Appreciate that. Excellent. Well, let's
just for fun, there's a really good in data center discussions. There's a fun acronym floating around, which is Beyonce. Bring your own new clean energy.
Yeah,
Beyonce. There you go.
Oh,
the Beyonce Act. I can see it. I can see it coming.
Get the young vote.
So with that, we can move to wrapping up. And our next steps, these are some of the topics we anticipate coming to us in the next 3 months and the dates of our meetings in the next 3 months. I imagine that we will try and tuck in a couple of other topics, but we do have some continued work ahead of us to get our products and decisions nailed down. So we definitely want to kind of focus in as much as we can on these and then add additional learning as we can fit it in. So thanks to everyone. It was a great conversation and a lot of good input and ideas that we already can start to assemble in terms of both recommendations and areas to focus on starting to get going, writing the documents. So thank you again. And with that, I will close the June 12th meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission. Thank you for your participation.